Go to agenda item 2.2. This is research data sharing agreement with Department of Health and Human Services. And we'll invite Katie Chalice to tee us up here. Oh, one quick reminder, just for the public, we have 4 of us here. We have Member Wood, Vice Chair Carey, Member Hart, and myself, Chair Hymas of the Law and Licensing Committee, and then Member Lear will jump on virtually when she can. Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Katie Chalice, Director of Privacy. So, committee, this request likely will sound familiar to you because this data request, because it is a modified version of a request you received in March. This is a request from Health and Human Services. I'll tell you how it's different than the first. So the requester was responsive to feedback from this committee about why the committee decided to not move forward with the request, the data request. So originally the request was in order to evaluate 4 programs, all of which were early childhood programs that DHHS administers. And you may recall that only one of those programs has built in place the ability for a parent to both participate in the program and choose to have their data not used for research. That's the ASQ program, the Ages and Stages Questionnaire. And based on feedback from the committee, the hope was, or the researcher felt that, oh, well, if we could bring back the request that only meets that requirement where someone could participate in the Ages and Stages Questionnaire, but also choose to not have their data shared for research, the thought from the researcher was that perhaps the committee would be amenable to that. And so that's the modified request, is that this would be data sharing only for families who participate in the Ages and Stages Questionnaire, and additionally, only those families who agree to have their data shared for the purpose of research. And I really hope that I characterize that correctly. Stephen Matherly is online, right? And I imagine he could correct me if I was wrong on any of that or answer any other questions.
Thank you, Katie. Stephen, are you available if I ask you a question?
Hello, good morning, and that did sound accurate.
Okay, thank you. One of the questions I have, we talked about last time is, and I asked this last time, and I don't believe it was a possibility at the time, but as Katie had mentioned, you've made some adjustments. When the individual signs up for this, the child is quite young, and then years later you want to start collecting data. Is there a process to inform the parent of saying, hey, we are going to begin collecting data on your child? Or is this, you sign up and say, I agree to this, and then years later, how long does that last? I agree to this for 5 years. I agree to this for 10 years. What does that look like when a parent says, yeah, I agree to share my information?
Sure, thank you. It's a great question. And another adjustment we made to this data sharing agreement was to add, well, if it's approved by this subcommittee as well as the full board, we're going to add a USBE language to that disclosure. These screenings go up until a child, they could be as young as 2 months old or as old as 5 years. And we're asking for data just through 3rd grade. And so we've done our best to make it transparent that this includes data sharing with USBE. And we could even add, up to 3rd grade, if that would, help facilitate this, or we could be more specific with the language there, if that would be helpful.
I think it would be helpful if a parent is getting in there. We don't just want some open-ended, we're going to track you for life. It's if you're going to say, hey, we're asking your permission to watch your child until 3rd grade, then I think it should be known. Sure. So I would prefer something like that if this does even move forward. But that's just one piece of this. Any other questions? Any questions from committee members? We have Vice Chair Carey and then Member Hart.
Yeah, I have several questions, Chair. Director Chalish, this is, I guess it's line 16. This rule is characterized as a category 3. What does that mean?
Oh, Member Carey, I think you might be, this one is not a rule. This is
Oh, the contract.
right, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I still think it's line 16. Is that right?
No,
no,
there's
no,
no
no, no,
lines.
no.
Yeah,
I see. I apologize. I'm looking at the rule.
yeah, no problem.
I do have a question
Okay,
about this
still on this,
contract,
okay.
though. Yeah. So, our schools are required, once they agree to administer the SHARP survey, and that data is provided to the LEA, it's provided to the school, it's provided to the state. There's no requirement that those results be provided to USBE without the express permission of the LEA. It's also not provided to the parents in any particular digestible format. So my question is, the results that you gather in this survey, who is privy to that? Will the parents of the, and I'm assuming this is all de-identified, but if we're looking at students in a certain school, a certain LEA, is that data provided back to them in a digestible, understandable format? Stephen?
Yeah. Just to be clear, this is completely different than the SHARP survey, but yes, any research or reports we're able to generate from this particular project, we can certainly make that available to the public on our websites and to leadership from USBE and DHHS, some of the other involved entities, any parent or teacher
Stephen,
groups that are interested.
You said you'd be happy to provide it. Does the agreement or the proposal require you to do that, to provide the results of this research back to the parents of the subjects that you were studying in a digestible, understandable format?
I believe the agreement gives us an obligation to provide an outcome back to USBE. I'm not sure how reasonable it would be to try to track down the parents that participate in the screening, but we can certainly make it available through the entities that they receive the service from.
And Chair, if I may, one more question.
Sometimes a child can receive one screen, let's say at 8 months old, and then that's it. Some children might receive a developmental screen at 6 months, 8 months, 12 months. It really varies upon each child. So it'd probably be beyond our scope to contact every parent that participated in a developmental screening. They know the results of their developmental screening, if that's what you're asking me. But the overall and overarching research project as to the effectiveness of our early childhood programs, that's what this research is speaking to. Our early childhood programs, discovering children that have special needs early and referring them to the services they need. And that's who we would want to share the outputs with, these programs that facilitate these services, and of course, USB.
Thank you, Chair, if I may. So sometimes we hire organizations to conduct research, and the organizations that are hired have members of the USBE on their boards or advisory boards, which I view as a conflict of interest. Do you have any provision in the proposed agreement to address these conflicts of interest where organizations that are hired or individuals that are hired to conduct this research, that they do not have a supervisory role at USBE?
Yes, this research at this point is planned. It's internal research, and we're talking about descriptive type of analysis. We don't intend on contracting this out and have any kind of conflicts with members of a subcontractor on a board or anything of that nature.
Director Chalice?
Yeah, thanks. So to answer your question, no, there's no language in the contract. However, what you are asking is met in the fact that, as Stephen mentioned, this is being conducted internally by 2 DHHS staff.
And I understand that there's no current plans, according to Stephen, to do that, but plans change. So because there's no conflict of interest policy specifically addressing potential conflict with USBE members of the superintendency as well as this board, I'm going to oppose this application. Additionally, I'm going to oppose it because the data that's being collected, there is no provision in the contract directing that this research be shared with the participants. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. Member Hart?
So I just want clarification on which part this was. So there were a couple of different research, either different, were they different altogether, different studies, or different parts of the same study last time?
Yeah, Chair, would you like me to respond to that question? Yeah, they were all part of the same study. And I hope that my explanation of what was presented to you in March, it was not confusing. But I did think it might be helpful for you to understand how this is different.
Right.
So in March, the request was to analyze the efficacy of 4 different programs that are administered by DHHS. This time it's limited to just one of those 4. And it was selected because it is the only one of those 4 that allows for a parent to separate their consent for research from their consent for participation in the program.
Okay, so this does not include the ones that you had to consent in order to get the screening. In addition, is this the one that allowed for parents to know right off the bat that their children's data, if they consented, is going to be used? Like, this isn't anything retroactive. Parents knew before they even started whether they had the choice of whether or not to consent to their data being used at the beginning. There's no like backwards after the fact, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Other questions from committee members? If not, I'd entertain
Also,
a motion.
I'd like just to add that there is a conflict of interest language in the standard terms of the contract. The previous board member spoke to a conflict of interest, and there is some language. Researcher represents that none of its officers or employees are officers or employees of the state entity or the state of Utah unless disclosure has been made to the state entity.
Okay.
Does that answer your, Vice Chair Carey, go ahead.
Thank you for that. Does that mean that members of the USBE or our superintendency are also covered by that conflict? Or does that just, the language you read, does that appeal to the people on your side of the ledger?
Is that a question for Director Chalice, Katie, or maybe both?
Both, I would think.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the language to hopefully answer your question as accurately as possible. The researcher represents that none of its officers or employees.
That was my understanding as well. I do not believe that it would cover members of USBE or our superintendency from acting in a manner that would put them in conflict, meaning they have interests here, they have interests there. And so for that, I would oppose this particular contract.
Okay. Any other questions or? No? Okay. Any motions to be made? Let me see here.
I'll go ahead and make a motion.
Sure.
I actually voted against this last time because of the parent consent being not available. I appreciated that this was focused into those that gave that consent. So thank you for making the adaptations that I needed to feel comfortable with this. So I move that the committee approve the data sharing agreement with the Department of Health and Human Services and forward to the board for approval.
Thank you, Member Wood. The motion before the committee is that the committee approve the data sharing agreement with the Department of Health and Human Services and forward to the board for approval. Any discussion of that motion? I'll just say briefly, I mean, I know I said I'd say it briefly. I want to be careful here because I recognize that data is how we get information. It's how we can develop programs to be helpful. My concern here is making the parents aware. It's all in the hands of the parents. That's where my concern is, that a parent has a choice to say, I will provide this data that will strengthen this program, or I'd rather not. And for me, it looks like Stephen and his team has offered that. So I'm going to speak in favor of this motion and vote for it. But that's my comment on the motion. Any other discussion, Molly?
So I agree. In addition, I am just as a just statement of where I'm at. I would never be okay with using data that was collected prior to a parent's consent. In addition, I have a really super hard time with a program that requires data collection as a condition of participating in a public health initiative. So, just take that for what it's worth, put it in the ether. I believe that de-identified data is de-identified, and there's a point at which the data is not individually. Like I'm going to the point that you can't provide individual data results after data has been de-identified and then manipulated. You can provide the general report, but you can't provide individual data. So I'm going to support it because one, and most of all, the parent gave permission prior to collection of data. And secondly, because those other programs were excluded that required participation or required data collection as a condition of receiving the public health benefit.
Thank you. We have Member Lear and then Vice Chair Carey.
And I apologize for being late to the discussion. But I do recall it from, I feel a little like Groundhog Day, so I think I can just step right in. But I think we've put ourselves and organizations, our partners, in providing services to young people and their families in a catch-22, in an impossible situation. The legislature demands accountability for money spent. We, as responsible policymakers, want accountability for funds that are distributed, researchers that work with us, all kinds of programs. And then when it comes to saying, okay, now we need to get the data, we balk and say, oh, but wait, you can't. And we come up with all kinds of reasons and tedious explanations of how de-identified data is not really de-identified, or was there parent permission, or how long ago was there parent permission? And I belaboring this, but I think we're creating a situation that's untenable for us to be responsible policymakers and for partners to work with us. And I think we've got to work that out in a bigger context, because this happens over and over. And it would be irresponsible not to look at these programs and see what they're doing, see if they're effective. But that requires gathering data. And so, we've got to choose. Are we going to have no accountability like some programs we have recently experienced? Or are we going to have reasonable accountability and have some minute risk with data. So I feel like this is an important enough program that I absolutely support it. Secondly, to the conflict of interest discussion that I walked into, I think if we were to say to USB is not our staff, it's the superintendent's staff. But if we were to say to those individuals, it really troubles the board if you serve, if board or if employees serve on committees or vendor boards or whatever that are also directly related to that employee's service, it really troubles us. I think that the board members, the superintendent would be very responsive to that sensitivity. I don't think it requires a provision in a contract. I think it just requires us saying, this troubles us. I mean, the legislature's no great model for that. And I think we can do better. But I think all we need to do is say, we would like to encourage, or we would ask that those conflicts of interest are considered. Sorry, I went on longer than I meant. I support this.
Thank you, Member Lear. Vice Chair Carey.
A lot of discussion about data, but data, unless it is reliable and valid, is worthless. And data that we pay to collect that is unreliable or not valid is worthless and costs the taxpayers of this state money. The reason a conflict of interest policy is absolutely essential is that it increases the metrics, that the data that is being collected will be valid and reliable. And we've had instances where members of our superintendency have been on the boards of contracts that have been awarded. This contract does not provide that protection to the Utah taxpayer. It does not provide that protection to members of this board. And so for that reason, I'm going to oppose it at this time. I would hope that in the interim, and maybe this is an indication of how seriously you take the conflict of interest, but hopefully between now and the time this matter comes before the full board, additional consideration could be given to the language in your existing conflict of interest, where it not only proscribes conflicts on your side of the ledger, Mr. Matherly, but would also, and I appreciate that because it's a recognition that, yeah, we don't want these conflicts. Conflicts are bad. And we'll see this again when we look at the sensitive materials, that category 3, keeping pornography out of our schools. We'll see that this conflict of interest, we have that same issue when it comes to sensitive materials. And I think as a board, we need to take that much more seriously. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I will let the public and Vice Chair Carey know, and I don't know if you do know or not. I was just informed that the staff have a conflict of interest form. I don't want to get into it now, just for your information to look at later or dive into it. I see you have a comment, but something is in place. Again, I don't know how extensive it is or what the reach is, but just an invitation to look more into that. I believe it's public as well. Vice Chair Carey.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the form. It's insufficient, and we're working on actually putting a more aggressive conflict of interest policy or provision into our policies and into the bylaws. We may not be able to get there with the votes that we currently have, but I absolutely believe that it is inappropriate for any member of our superintendency to serve on an organization that receives a contract from this group. And the fact that that has taken place and may be taking place with these contracts is unacceptable. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, let's look at the motion here. The motion before the committee is that the committee approve the data sharing agreement with the Department of Health and Human Services and forward to the board for approval. We know we have a split vote, so we'll do this individually. We'll start with Member Lear. Member Wood.
Yes.
Member Vice Chair Carey.
Absent the conflict of interest policy, no.
Member Hart.
Yes.
And I'm a yes. So thank you. Stephen, thank you, Katie, for your work on this, and
Sure.
we look forward to see what happens in August. See if things have changed here.
Chair, I wonder, I'm so sorry.
Please.
Would it be appropriate for me to ask a question? I just wondered if we could easily add a provision in here that explain, I mean, staff and including superintendency have no intention of being involved in this at all, and it's not paid. And so I'd be happy to add something in there that explains that in the contract, if that would be helpful.
I think it would be helpful. Vice Chair Carey is welcome to speak for himself, but it sounds like that would be helpful, and if that could be prepared before our next August meeting, that would be great.
Yeah, that would be easy to do. And I'm so sorry. Can I say one more thing?
Sure.
I just want to give credit where credit is due. Member Wood expressed gratitude for adjusting the request. That was all on Stephen. He was extremely responsive to the feedback from the committee. He was saying, oh yeah, I totally understand where they're coming from. So I thought that was really great of him to be responsive to your feedback in March. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's move to agenda item 2.3. This is Tintic School District waiver request. And we have, is Ashley in? She is online.
Yes, hello.
We
good
also
morning.
have, we also have Superintendent Thornock with us, and can we just invite you up for questions now? Is that okay? And then Ashley will tee us up and we'll open to discussion. Thank you, Ashley.
Okay, yes, good morning, committee. So this request from Tintic School District is a waiver renewal request for Rule R277419, subsection 4, the requirement for 180 instructional days. Tintic has been on this waiver for the past 12 years now. All of the schools in the district are necessarily existing small schools. And their survey had 95% of parents in favor, parents and students, and 100% of staff in favor. And the student achievement data should be in your packets.
Thank you, Ashley. Any questions from the committee? Member Wood?
Can I ask you some questions? Okay, so it looks like your absentee rates were going up the last 2 years, but we're seeing that across the state. And I'm not sure that a waiver, attributes to that, but do you have any understanding of why you see that
And
number changing?
Superintendent, if you'll push that little, that's it.
I believe that we've seen that rise since COVID as well. I don't want to blame COVID. I'm so over that. But I think that's what it is. I think the legislature has helped us by strengthening the absenteeism policies across the state. And so we've tried to follow suit. I would hope that will help that absenteeism rate drop. We also have our own programs where we're trying to encourage students to come using positive behavioral intervention and just trying to encourage a culture of attending. I don't know if you're supposed to say it, we would like to make school to be a place where they would like to be and where they want to come and learn. And so those are the small steps we're trying to make towards that. And I think with the help of the state, we'll see those numbers begin to drop. I feel like they've apexed and are starting to drop. And I hope I'm not speaking out of turn. I think across the state, we're seeing that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we saw that. I actually went on a tour with Richfield County and they were talking about how those guardrails missing made a huge difference. And some of those guardrails have been put back legislatively. So one follow-up question is you have amazing proficiency rates in the 3rd grade. And then there's like this significant drop for a few years. What is anything being done to target those 4th, 5th, and 6th grade years to impact that?
Yes, you actually are up. I like our trajectory, but I think with the addition of letters coming in as a program, we're going to see those rise. I wonder. About 2 years ago, we began kind of an overhaul of I would say all things that are in our district. And we started really with the elementary. Again, it was in response to the numbers we were seeing K through 3, especially after the pandemic. So we've added a number of full-time positions and teachers that are in the classroom, paraeducators. Our SPED numbers have almost doubled. And so we've added FTEs there, really tried to build an infrastructure that would pay off for us in the coming decade in response to the data that we were seeing. And so I hope, again, I don't want to sound like a cop-out. I hope that will pay off and we'll see those numbers rise over the next years. I would like to say they're apexing, but I do fully see that those numbers are lower there and up into our secondary level. They're not acceptable to me. And so we're working with, even with the USBE and getting resources to those areas and for our children.
Well, thank you. Thanks for letting me put you on the spot a little bit.
Oh, I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Seeing no other comments, I'll go ahead and make a motion. I move that the committee approve Tintic School District's request for a waiver renewal from R277-419, Section 4, and forward to the board for approval. Any discussion to that motion? Member Lear.
I just had a sudden thought about that maybe could be directed to AAG Beal,
Sure.
if that's okay. Is there anything we've talked about this in relation to other waivers sometimes? Is there anything that was missing from the information we needed? It seems to me it's all available, but is there anything, Ashley, that you felt like was missing or we needed more background or information on?
No, I don't believe so. Superintendent Thornock was very responsive, very in touch with me back and forth. We had several phone calls throughout this waiver process. So I believe the waiver they submitted contained all the information that we typically require in the waiver rule.
Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Carey.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would just reiterate what was said yesterday. My concern is not with this this is a renewal. They may have been one of the first schools to request a waiver, but we are seeing not only an increase in the number of applicants for a waiver to our 5-day school week, but these waiver requests are coming in an accelerated manner. And if that's the direction we're going, instead of just letting it happen, I think this board has a responsibility to look at this and develop policies to say, one, is this a good thing? What does the state look like if we're all on the 4-day school week? Because that is the direction we're going. So I have formally requested from board leadership, or will as soon as I hit send on this email, a request that a study committee be put together that we really look at this issue, because I know it was brought up yesterday and people thought it was a good idea, but I think that went to the good idea pile. And I just want to make sure that we really look at this issue, because first year on the board, I didn't see any requests. And in the last 6 months, we've had entire districts apply for a waiver. So I think we have to be proactive about that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So the motion before the committee is that the committee approve Tintic School District's request for a waiver renewal from R277-419, Section 4, and forward to the board for a approval. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you, Superintendent. Ashley, you'll stick around as we move to agenda item 2.4. This is Rich School District waiver request. And we will invite Superintendent Lamborn to join us for this one. And then Ashley, if you'll take over.
Okay, yes. So this request out of Rich School District is also for a waiver renewal. Rich School District has actually been, this might be the longest standing one, Board Member Carey. They have been on this schedule since the 1992-1993 school year. The request is also for the waiver of R277-419, the 180 days requirement in order to implement a 4-day schedule. They will still be offering over 1,000 hours, instructional hours in the year. The one thing that this application was missing was there was not parent-student survey on the parent and student satisfaction. So, but yeah, everything else should be in the application. And I don't know if Superintendent Lamborn is there in person, but I know, if not, Jenny Johnson online, I believe. Oh, I think you are there in person. Okay, so.
Yes, he is here. So
Fantastic.
thank you, Ashley. Let's open it up to questions from the committee. Member Wood?
Just to be honest, I'm going to take a few minutes to look because when I did my research, the packet was missing. And so all I had in my notes was there's no data, there's no, so I'm looking now, I see it's all here. So I apologize.
And I apologize for that. I'm messed up. We have turned, and I got packets so we can go back. Historically, Rich School District was on it in the early 90s. Then Carol will remember Superintendent Bean took all those that were on the 4-day week at that time off for a number of years. And then in 2004, 2005, we resubmitted to be on. We were the first at that point. And a couple of reasons, and I think it speaks to what Board Member Carey just addressed. When we submitted to be on the 4-day week, it was to enhance instructional time. There are lots of reasons to go on the 4-day week, but our reasons were not to save money. They weren't to cut down on or to enhance teacher retention. We're very isolated. Our athletic schedules require us, our closest region game is 2.5 hours away from our high school. And so when we go to activities, it's a bus ride. By putting all of our activities, and at the time when we submitted our initial request, we made a commitment to the board that we would not miss instructional time Monday through Thursday. Sometimes if we can leave after school on Thursday and get there and play a game, we will, or if we host games at home. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we don't allow any interruptions with after school activities at the middle school or high school. The only exception to that when we came to the board initially was for culminating events. Obviously, we can't control those, so we do miss some school for culminating events. But the culminating event that takes the most time away is boys and girls basketball. And we do our spring break during boys and girls basketball, so that teachers was the big problem there. Even missing the students that attended was an issue. But obviously, a lot of our teachers were also parents of kids or wanted to go. And so by putting our spring break over boys and girls basketball state, we can just do that. So we have made a significant commitment to not only having more instructional hours than the required 990, but to ensuring that we do not interfere in that instructional day, because that was our premise back in 2004, 2005, when we initially requested, and it's still our number one priority is to keep teachers in front of kids. And to represent, or to Board Member Carey's comment, if people are coming in with waivers for other reasons, I think they should be questioned in terms of what is the motivation here. But our motivation was to enhance student-teacher interaction time in a significant way. I think Board Member Wood, I unfortunately, I think we're in a little bit the same situation as Tinnick is, as our absenteeism has gone up. We have tried as a district to address that somewhat unsuccessfully. When we first went on the 4-day week, we stressed very much to parents, and we continue to do it, but it's getting harder, that you schedule your dentist and doctor's appointments on Friday. It's getting to where getting dentist and doctor's appointments on Fridays is harder because they're taking Fridays off too. So that's gone. But I think if you look at our data, and we can go clear back We've got booklets every year, and I apologize that um, the last few years, all we've had to do is turn in the waiver request, and we didn't get this to you because we used to turn it in every year, and then they said that was unnecessary. But if any of you want to see our historical data going back to that year, we can provide it. But our test scores continue to be not where we're satisfied, but above state averages. Our student graduation rates are outstanding. We feel like we do a good job educationally. This year we had 14 students out of a graduating class of 42 graduate with their associate's degrees. A number of other students with CTE programs getting completers and certifiers. And so we think that this is extremely good for our educational setting because we've got teachers in front of kids solidly for 4 days a week.
Thank you, Superintendent. Questions from the committee? Member Wood?
I want to thank you for the packet. It's very well done. And for those of us that are new to the board, it's nice to not just check the box and send you on your way with approving it. It's just kind of nice to see the data and see how you're implementing it. And I really appreciate your feedback there of what you're doing to make sure those kids are in class, and your hours you're doing very well in terms of getting kids in front of teachers for a long period of time. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Wood. Member Lear?
I have the same question for Ashley I had previously. I wanted to make sure, because she and I had talked and she was concerned we didn't have all the information we may want. And I just wanted to make sure that now we do. Is that true, Ashley?
Yeah, so you guys have all the student achievement data. The only thing that, typically you might look for that is in an application that's not there is the parent and student surveys, which I imagine with them being on this schedule that long, they're probably pretty pleased with it, but it's something that if you're concerned about not having, I'm sure you could ask Superintendent Lambourne to probably get done before the August board meeting.
I think for consistency's sake, and I don't know if this requires a motion or a big deal, but for consistency's sake, if we could have that survey information before the board meeting, would that be possible? I know it's not a ton of people. Is that too hard to do?
We could certainly get that out there. We're being summer and so
It'll be
forth. I
hard.
don't know if the respondent rate would be
Perfect.
give us very valid data, but we can certainly do it.
I just think to be consistent, and I agree with Ashley's comment that you've been on it for a long time. Obviously, your community likes it. Can I follow up with just a question to Superintendent Lambourne?
Yeah, let me just jump on before you go to your
Okay.
next question. I would appreciate that as well. I think we have these processes for a reason. So when we start saying, well, you've been
that's
doing it
fine.
long enough, you don't need a survey. I think we need to, communities change and develop. And so I think it's important that we see that come before our next August meeting.
Thank you.
And we'll certainly get
And-
that out. Again, I hope we get enough respondents. that it's
Whatever your return rate
valuable.
is, we understand. It's a sort of late summer request. So I think that's important. And now, Matt, you made me forget my second point to Superintendent Lambourne. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Just anecdotally, have you heard concerns? I actually had two things. Have you heard any concerns from community members from your school community members about a 4-day week as opposed to a 5-day week?
And I don't know, you can ever say everything's 100%. I have no negative feedback on the 4-day week.
At all. And
It's been extremely positive.
And the other thing is I noticed that you have a pretty average, a little high percentage of students with disabilities. Do you feel like that they're, and again, this might be a better question for whoever works most directly with your special ed students, but do you feel like I worry that they're not getting the services they need with only 4 days of school?
Again, anecdotally, have had no complaints from any of the parents of those high needs kids. And certainly if there was a situation where we thought that we were shorting those kids, we could make accommodations to be there 5 days, but that's not been the case. And it is, when we first went to that was one of our concerns. We had a very aggressive special ed teacher, and she was wondering if the 3 days away would be a problem. And again, we have not seen that. In fact, I think in our situations, a lot of those parents appreciate the fact that they've got that 3-day weekend with their kids. So,
And they're long bus rides too for some.
yeah,
of
that's
those
the other
kids.
thing about us is we're a countywide school. So we're picking kids up at the Idaho border and the Wyoming border. It's some cases a 45-minute one-way bus ride, and they don't miss that.
And I know you have I hope you have the same special ed director because she was really incredible and
She's since retired, but we've got a new one that is incredible.
really great. That's important. Thank you. I appreciate your answers. Thank you, Chair.
Vice Chair Carey, and then Member Hart.
Yeah, Superintendent Lambert, so I imagine you get together with other superintendents occasionally, discuss things with them.
Oh, yeah. Not always this, but we talk about a lot of things.
Wait, this isn't the first thing on your mind? Can I just ask you just a question generally, and you may or may not know, but just anecdotally, as a board, we're seeing this increase in applications, and AAG Beal said you may have been one of the first schools on this, so that's certainly not your organization. What is your sense of what is driving this? Because certainly the commute times for the students hasn't gotten longer, right? I mean, they've been on these buses for a while. What do you think is driving this increase in the number of schools applying for this waiver?
And I hate to speak for other superintendents. I think several things is driving that a little bit. It's happening in the workplace outside of education with people promoting 4-day weeks. I've heard some superintendents talk about it as a way to incentivize teacher retention, that it makes it more applicable. And that's why I started my comments with my bias is if it's for anything other than student learning, then we need to be very skeptical of that. And that's what drove us back in 2004, 2005. We were interrupting instructional days too much and taking coaches out of the classroom, and we felt like this was the best way to address that. So there's lots of things, I think, pushing it. Some think they're going to save a lot of money. I think when they've analyzed that, there is a little bit of money saving. It's not certainly a driving force for us, and we probably would save as much as anybody because of our extreme transportation costs. But again, if you put all those things on the table, they are very, very secondary to instructional learning time.
Thank you. Member Hart.
Yeah, I also think that, I mean, it's just my speculation, but when, and I too am so over pandemic related excuses / reasons. But having said that, I think that one outcome of the pandemic is that certain things that we took as almost gospel, so to speak, kind of got shaken loose. And when we started using more technology to post assignments, not talking about technology to teach, but to manage making assignments, turning in assignments. And when so much of that went digital and students weren't in school, it shook loose the notion that you have to have a rear end and a seat in order for students to learn. And I think that's a lesson that we could debate. I also think it may be something that drives parents' change in behavior or attitude towards, in some cases, fighting to get your kid to go to school every single day. If they can show you that their assignments are done and they can convince you no harm, no foul, then it changes those dynamics a little bit. And I too rode a bus for I think it was an hour and 10 minutes every day. And I can tell you it's hard when it's the middle of winter and you're going to be sitting on that really, uncomfortable ride for an hour and 10 minutes. You really fight hard not to go to school every single day. But having said that, I also want to make the point that I'm always going to side on the side of local control in this if a process has been followed. I believe that's a community decision. I believe that we could have, when this board decided about the 990 / 180 days, we may have served our communities better by going with the 990 rather than the 180. I just believe in flexibility. I believe that those are instructional decisions best made at the local site, and therefore I'm always going to be, it's going to be hard for me to ever vote against a request that has gone through the process. So having said that, I would like to make the motion that the committee approve Rich School District's request for a waiver renewal from R277-4194 and forward to the board for approval.
Thank you, Member Hart. The motion before the committee is that the committee approve Rich School District's request for a waiver renewal from R277-4194 and forward to the board for approval. Seeing no lights for further, Member
Yeah,
Wood.
Just with the request that added to your packet, recognizing we know it's summer. Like,
And I will, with that, we'll get the latest, but we've got that from years and years past, and I'll bring that to you because it's well in the over 90% in all the years that we did it. So
I
we've
don't know.
got that back information, and we'll include that as well as the new survey.
Great. Do I need to add that to the motion, or is that just a general understanding?
I mean, this is a personal thing. If it doesn't come, there's probably going to be some consequences. So it's in the superintendent's best interest to bring it.
That was a very nice way of saying you better get it done.
So, yeah. So we'll keep the motion as is, but superintendent, know that we'll be looking for that. Is that okay?
Certainly. And I'll include the back years as well, just to give you that perspective.
Thank you. Okay. With the motion before the committee having been read a few times, let's go ahead and vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ashley. Let's move to agenda item 2.5, R277-124, teacher bonuses for extra assignments. This is a repeal, and we have Angie who will tee us up.
Good morning, committee members. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. And today's first rule is a repeal. And this is related to a program that was enacted during the 2022 session. And, oh, sorry, I was showing the wrong rule. One sec. It's R277-124. There was a one-time appropriation during the 2022 session for teacher bonuses for extra assignments. Those one-time funds were distributed, and the program is being repealed at the legislative level as of July 1, 2024. This section of code is repealed, and so we are recommending that the board also repeal the associated rule.
Thank you, Angie. I don't see any lights or questions or discussion. Member Hart?
I move that the committee repeal R277-124 on first reading and recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Hart. The motion before the committee is that the committee repeal R277-124.
Can I
Sorry,
make one comment?
It just went away. Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure the motion is on the floor here, and then we have some discussion to that. No worries. The motion on the floor is that the committee repeal R277-124 on first and recommend the board repeal first reading and recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading. Member Wood.
I just have one comment. This is a really good reminder that the legislature giveth and the legislature taketh away.
Yeah, thank you. It's difficult to repeal something with that title. They could have given us a title that was easier to repeal, but here we are. So again, one last time, the motion before the committee is that the committee repeal R277-124 on first reading and recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. Member Lear?
And this is related to the rule and we voted and it wouldn't change my perspective. I'm just trying to remember how much money was attached. Angie may, well, it wasn't very much, like $100,000. Is that too little?
It was
More than that?
I'm thinking it was around 20 to 40 million, but they
Oh.
were one-time bonuses. Again, this is a 2022 session and the legislature, the Public Ed Appropriations Committee really wanted to recognize how difficult the 21-22 school year was. Many
Oh,
people
that's
were
right.
thinking of the 2020-21 school year as being very difficult as far as the pandemic goes, but then even 21-22, they had staffing shortages. There were still these expectations of people leaving for large periods of time from school if they'd been exposed. Anyway, it was, I think, a token of appreciation to recognize the hard work of educators and other professional staff. But I believe
That's
this
right.
money went directly to educators for extra hours and extra work that they had done.
Thanks for that little reminder.
Thank you. Let's move to agenda item 2.6, R277-925, effective teachers in high poverty schools. And we have Angie here to get us going.
Yeah. So this bill or this rule is related to SB 64 from the legislative session, which did two things. Number one, the bill eliminated language that was old, that was only used specifically for purposes of calculating who was eligible to receive the bonus during the 22-23 school year. And then the second thing this rule does is it's reflecting a new requirement for USBE to contact eligible educators directly when they are eligible to receive the bonus. In the past, our staff does compile a list of eligible teachers and then forwards that list on to LEAs, and the LEAs have been the ones who have contacted the eligible educators. And oh, by the way, this program is a voluntary program. It's not required for LEAs to participate in. And LEAs do contribute half of the cost of the bonus if they choose to participate. So this will be the first year that we USBE staff will be sending notification to eligible educators. And so what you can see that we've done here is at the time that we will be sending information to LEAs about the names of the eligible educators, we will also let them know the date on which we will be sending out notices directly so that they know when their educators will be informed from USBE. And again, this is another just small technical change to instead of referring to with less than 10 tested students, we just point to the rule R2774997, which gets into more detail about which students count towards a teacher's score or not. And then again, last, you can see the language from the 22-23 school year calculation has been removed. And also the oversight category of 2 has been added. This is because this is generally a local control program. It's a voluntary program. LEAs are required to provide half. The LEAs do determine which educators they're going to give the bonus to or not. The calculation we do at the state level is using assessment data. We help determine which educators met the benchmark scores that are required in code.
Thank you. Member Wood?
Just one question. I noticed you went through the rule. It changes subject to course. And we don't assess courses, we assess subjects. So what's the recommendation behind that?
Line 65, I believe.
Yes. Actually, I believe it is the opposite. And I don't know if Darren Nielsen, Malia, do you have the answer to that? I know that it was explained to me once, but I'm not recalling it right now. But remember what?
Malia Hyatt, Executive Coordinator of Educator Licensing. The difference is, like a subject is mathematics and courses is secondary math 1. And so are they being assessed on secondary math 1? Or are they being assessed on grade 8? Or are they just being assessed on all of mathematics? So it's just more specific.
So this isn't our summative assessments at the end. These are different. Because I thought growth scores were calculated on our end of the year assessments.
Do you want to take it? You take it.
Okay, I'll take it. Yes, this is the end of the year. So student growth scores are how much did they earn or learn this year compared to last year, but it's within their course, the class that they're taking and not the subject overall. It's nuance.
Does that answer your question, Member Wood, or create more questions? It looks like Member Lear has a light. Member Hart might have a comment.
Go ahead.
I would, the way the data connects is through the teacher attached to the course, attached to the student. So we don't report up all of that aggregated. We report it by the student being attached to a course that's attached to a teacher. So you would have to use that in order to get to the data you're looking for. Is that an okay way of explaining it? Making sure I'm right too. Make sure.
Member Lear.
I'm trying to understand line 65, 66. Excluding courses or teachers who fail to meet accountability. That makes sense. I'm trying to understand what was the notion about with less than 10 tested students? Why did that go away? I'm just wondering. I'm just wondering if, because that does seem kind of a valid concern.
The eligibility is related to those N sizes of less than 10. If they don't have a greater number than 10, they're not eligible per the rule. In the accountability rule.
And this,
Okay, so it should say, it would have said with more than 10 tested students would have.
So it's just excluding.
Excluding.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Courses or
It's just
teachers.
redundant. Since it's
Oh,
already defined
okay.
in 497.
I gotcha. Thank you. Thanks for that. I didn't check that link. Thank you.
seeing no other lights, any other questions? I'd entertain a motion. Get that up there. Member Lear.
I always worry I can't read the motion, but I move that the committee approves R277, thank you for making it bigger, R277-925 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-925 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you, Dr. Height. Let's, and Angie, of course, but you have to stay here anyway, but let's move to agenda item 2.7. This is R277-482, school personnel email addresses. And Angie, go ahead.
Great, thank you. So this rule is related to a bill that passed this last session, House Bill 82. It had that particular bill had about 10 different programs and elements, but one portion of the bill requires the State Board of Education to collect email addresses of school employees by October 1 of each year, and to provide those email addresses to the legislature for purposes of them being able to communicate directly with school employees, as well as the state board also has the ability to send emails out to all school employees. Originally, when we were reviewing this particular requirement, and it is now codified in 53G 7224, we did not anticipate doing a board rule because it's pretty self-explanatory, collect email addresses and then make those available to the legislature and giving some provisions. But as with almost everything in education, things are never as simple as you might think. And as we were explaining to LEAs, which email addresses do you want from us, we realized that the defined term in code appeared on its face to be a little narrower than I think the legislature intended. And also there were some questions about what is a school campus? What if a teacher's an online teacher, virtual teacher, et cetera. So you can see here the defined term of school employee is referred to in 53G 7224, but it actually points to 53G 8510. And so we have added school campus just to make sure that essentially any school employee who works for an LEA that has an LEA generated email address. So that means that they have the, at abcschooldistrict.org or abccharterschool.org and they are being paid, those are the addresses that they would send to us that will then be available for the legislature and the board to send out email communications. The other thing that concurrently, not even related to this bill, our staff is actually working on a standard operating procedure related to our communications, staff communications with LEAs in an effort to reduce the number of communications. We don't send emails to school employees directly. We do send them to district superintendents and charter school directors, or different groups like Katie Chalice would send them to student data privacy points of contact, and Aaron Bruff would send it to data folks, and Scott to business officers. But we were working on a standard operating procedure, and there were some questions about whether members of the public or others might think that this now limits USBE staff from communicating with LEAs more than 3 times a year. So in an effort to clear that up, we just simply clarified here that it's related to the legislature or board, or does not include communications from the superintendent or staff. And then you'll see here that the staff will be sending out a data collection tool, which is essentially a Qualtrics survey on September 1, giving LEAs a month to populate that, and then we will provide that. So that's it.
Thank you. Member Hart.
I hate rules for rules' sake, and I don't know why it's so hard that all doesn't mean all. And when USB says send up all your emails, why that doesn't just, I haven't ever been in a place where you can't send email in an organization to all users in the organization. So I'm irritated because I don't like extra rules, but I understand. I suppose I understand. So I just want to make the point that, well, we giveth and we taketh away, and we no longer require LEAs to send up I'm just grabbing one, the report on how we evaluated all the teachers, or the teachers' final, but now we've added the report that we have to send up all the email addresses. And then I actually do have a more productive question other than just griping. We get email to all employees from like the superintendent or the governor. How is that happening if we didn't already have a mechanism? Like the governor sends out a thanks for being a teacher during Teachers Week. And I think we got one last week that says thanks for finishing out the year. How are those happening if there wasn't already a mechanism?
The way they're happening right now is they're going to the LEA head, meaning the superintendent or charter director, and then those people are sending them out to their employees. So they aren't, USBE doesn't send emails. I know that there have been instances where the legislature has, because they've received emails, but in general, the protocol for USBE is that we do not send emails directly to educators. If they're licensed educators, they might get emails because they are related to their license. That's a little separate. But my knowledge, I've seen Superintendent Dixon, she might do this once or twice a year, but she sends them to the superintendents and charter directors and asks them to forward them on to the staff. Is that the way the governors came as well? Like it would come to the LEA head?
Well, if that's the case, oopsie. I guess I need to forward a late email to my my folks. I guess I was thanked and they were not, but that's a personal problem. I
remember her. May I add one just very recent example?
Sure,
I think it was
sure.
yesterday or the day before. Our office sent an email to LEA heads with a communication from the legislature and asked that the LEA heads forward it on to their staff.
Okay.
It was this week.
All right.
But that did not go directly to your staff.
Okay.
You would then forward it on.
Okay, I'll add that to the to-do list. Thank you for answering those questions. I still think unnecessary rules are the bane of our modern existence. So there.
Okay. Member Lear.
I recall, and I think this is related because it does seem, I agree, I very much agree with Member Hart about rules. But it also seems cumbersome and to send information to LEA heads to then send on to their employees. And that may be the only way it can happen. But I recall something about when licensed employees provide Cactus information, maybe this is a question for Malia, that they are promised that that'll only be used for licensing purposes. Is that true, or am I making that up, or so that they're not besieged with a bunch of, the kind of stuff that people might send to teachers as advertising or that kind of stuff? That we would have a protected status for that Cactus information? And am I remembering wrong or right?
Is that a question for Dr. Hart?
It's for Dr. Hart. Thanks.
Hi, yes, Malia Hyatt, Executive Coordinator of Educator Licensing. That is correct. So when educators provide their email address in USIMS, which is now the portal to get the information into Cactus, there is a privacy policy that they sign, and they say, and it says that their email address would be used only for licensing purposes.
Okay.
There is a plan for future development within USIMS to have educators opt in if they want to receive certain kinds of communication from the agency or other things. But for right now, it's specific to their licensing purposes.
Okay. All right. So that maybe down the road a little, it might be easier to get things, at least to licensed people. That wouldn't be all the employees of all LEAs, but at least licensed people. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Hart.
Yeah, is USIMS going to have the ability to? I don't know, Malia, if you, Dr. Haidt. No, I'm going to ask, why is this? And if not, why can't this data be reported up at the same time all the other data is reported up for in data uploads as part of USIMS? So we don't have to do a separate report.
I think eventually that's the plan, but we're still
Okay.
working on the development
Okay.
to make that functionality work.
All right.
Vice Chair Carey.
Yeah, I have several objections to this particular proposed rule, but just some questions first, if that's okay, Chair. So when I'm reading the actual law, 53G7224, it says that, look, when the state board wants to send communication through this system 3 times a year, it has to be official communication. Then I read our rule, and we define official communication as anything coming from the board. which seems very circular in nature, that the definition of official communication is, well, what the board decides is official communication. So that's one thing I struggle with, because again, it's like a definition without defining anything. The second one I have is when it says from the board, I want to make sure that I understand, does this mean board leadership, that 3 people? Does this mean the chair acting by himself or herself gets to decide? Or anyone who feels that they.
Happy to. So first off, generally we don't bind the board in board rules, because essentially the board rule is like your authority to tell everyone else your expectations as a board. As you just stated what you did, it may be helpful to establish a board policy, or in fact, I think there's one on today's agenda about board communication where we could include some not prohibitions, but you'll notice that the legislature in a lot of ways proactively included their way of determining what it was an official communication, and that was to allow the president of the Senate and the speaker of the House, if they both agreed to the communication, that was all that is needed, is those 2 people to approve its officialness. What you would like to do as a board, I would say, yes, probably it could be either board leadership, or you could require, depending on your desire, you could have it be the communication or letter be voted on by the full board. That is, you're absolutely correct. That is not addressed here and would actually be a better fit for a board policy. I would think a board policy would be the best. Without that, it would be, until you had a board policy in place, it would really be up to board leadership and the board to determine, kind of work through that. And again, the first time this could happen is not until after October 1. So we do have time. If you as a board would like some more structure, I guess, around this, we'd be happy to help work on that.
Just let me jump on this and kind of speak to what Vice Chair Carey is saying here. I've seen this as well, where sometimes a staff member will get an email and say, "Hey, your name's on here." I say, "Oh, okay, that's nice. What'd I say?" And so it would be nice to, and I agree with Angie here. Maybe we need to look at this in that policy and say, what does official communication of the board look like, right? And so I don't want to put. I think we can have this discussion at the appropriate policy time here. As far as this is concerned, you're saying this doesn't roll out till October. So is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the due date for LEAs to submit the email addresses is October 1. So the very earliest we'd be able to send a communication using these email addresses won't be until October 1. Primarily, this rule was to give direction to LEAs on expectations of what data are we expecting or hoping you will submit to us. So, yeah, and also staff expectations are in there a bit as well.
Thank you. Vice Chair Carey, additional questions?
Several. My concern is that, and we're falling into this habit where we're saying, well, let's pass this, and then we can address these other things at a later time. I give it 60-40 that the policy 2004 is actually discussed today, just given the nature of the agenda. And what can happen is that unless we have a formalized process, we push through one part of the rule that we are under law to address. And then we're told, well, we'll come back and we'll circle back and we'll fill in the color. And that process, one, doesn't happen, or is it happens in a very disjointed manner. So I would rather see us, to the extent possible, address this in oneness. So it's not broken up and we're saying, well, let's pass this and then we'll come back and we'll figure out, my concern is always, does the board mean Jim Moss? Or if Carol Lear is the chair one day, forbid, is it her? that gets to decide that? Like who, right? And people with less integrity than Jim and Carol, they may use it as a way to campaign. They send out their messages. What a great way to drive a narrative than the ability to contact every every educator in the state, right? That's who, is it educators, staffers? It's everyone. I mean, that's an incredible policy power, and it could also be an incredible political power. So I absolutely think it's a mistake to say, well, we're going to put this through and say, well, the board gets to decide, without a caveat on when do we circle back and when do we address this. So Angie, if you have a way to do that to ensure that, look, this just isn't going to be put into the abyss somewhere, and when we get to it, we get to it, that would make me much more comfortable, because I understand the need. We have to start giving LEAs direction.
Yeah, thank you, Board Member Carey. A lot of what you stated, I'm sure, I don't know that I personally have the power to control, but I will say the rule is about the legal requirement for LEAs to submit the data to us. There isn't a legal requirement for the board to send out communications. That is kind of a, that's, if you would like to do that, the legislature's now given you this explicit authority to do that. So I would say that I wouldn't feel personally as a staff person confident or feel like it's appropriate for me to tell the board what you should or shouldn't do. Although we are happy to help start with some parameters, of course, for a BARD policy. I just didn't, as you probably learned over the last couple of years that you've been on the board, staff starts by looking at the legal requirements and saying, okay, what do LEAs need to do and when, and what do we need to give clarity on? And that's why the rule came forward. But we'll be happy to do whatever we can to support that conversation.
Can I just bring up, it talks about official communication, from what I can tell, 3 times in this rule. 2 are in definitions, which are just definitions, which again, we need to address in our policy, which is on the end of this agenda. So I'd love to get to it. And then the third one is in the key, right? School employee work email addresses, official communication. So,
I do have an idea.
well,
Okay, I have one too.
Okay.
But
well, Vice Chair Carey, go ahead.
so this is mine would be that we just amend 1A. So official communications means communication approved by majority vote of the board. And that way we all see what's going out, we all get to review it, and we all get a say in whether it happens or not.
Would this, I'm again thinking of the policy, and we're having rules and policy, and then it's going to go to what trumps what. And I'm just wondering, again, is this something that we need to change in the policy, and the rule will fall in line?
I think that's fantastic, but again, it sounds like the Popeye, I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. I'd like to avoid that situation by saying, let's put this provision in this rule. And then when we change the policy, if necessary, we can amend this rule. But to let this out naked by just saying, hey, because when this passes, it's my understanding if Jim Moss wants to send an email to every educator, staffer, anyone we have an email address for, there's nothing proscribing him from doing that. And I use Jim, and I'm not suggesting he would, I'm just whoever the chair is. They could do that because currently when it comes just to normal correspondence, we have seen that board leadership and the chair of the board does not need our approval or consent to send official correspondence from the board out. They are our spokespeople. Now we're amplifying that exponentially from 2 to 2,000 in terms of their reach. So I am much more comfortable by saying we should all be able to look at that in advance and have a say in it. And if it's compelling enough, this board will support it. And if it's not, it won't. Now, Angie, if your idea is better, I'm certainly happy to give mine the heave-ho.
Angie, and then we have member Lear.
The only, we were on, you and I were actually thinking the same thing, which was to change that defined term of official communication. I think the only difference, so yours would add kind of that approved by a majority, approved by a majority vote of the board. I guess
Yes.
we could do it that way. The other option I was saying is as described in Board Policy 2004, which would say until there are provisions in there about sending official communications to school employees, no one would be able to do anything because it'd have to be vetted or fleshed out in the Board Policy 2004. I think one is that you're making the decision today. Another would be to say, well, we're going to have the conversation about that approach of what it takes when we talk about Board Policy 2004.
Chair, if 2004 is silent on this, like the process, does that proscribe them from doing it? Or does that say, well, there's nothing there preventing me from doing it, I'm just going to do it?
Has to be in accordance with the policy.
Right.
The policy doesn't describe it.
Well, and I'd have to look at Board Policy 2004 again, because it could talk about official communications in general right now and the approval process. So right now, if communications can be approved by board leadership, you're right that I think it could be read into that. But this, putting it in there could give a little bit more urgency, I guess, to getting Board Policy 2004 and making sure that the provisions related to this specific section of code are included. But I understand. I just wanted to give another option. I'm not saying mine was better or that you should do that. I'm just saying that one is making the decision today. The other would allow the decision to be made as part of that broader board communication policy.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. If you want to consider a motion,
I've got
and then we've got member Lear, then member Hart, and then
mine's to
I'll come back to.
another idea. So, given that I do not want this to be I mean, if the implication is we vote on a definition, the board by majority decides a category of information that's official communication, that would be fine. I do not want another vote after our 11 o'clock meeting last night where we only finished 2/3 of the agenda. So I do not want another vote. What I would suggest is, because this is in a rule, why don't we add the definition of official communication to the rule that has our definitions in it? So then we have a definition that we know is what goes whenever it's supposed to go or to whoever it's supposed to go or whatever. Because I do not want to vote on every item every time. So would that be a possibility, better than putting it in a policy, putting it in our rule for definitions?
One thing I just want to mention is this is a very specific communication to board member Carey's point that could potentially go out to 30 to 60,000 people, right? Versus a communication to an individual legislator or a communication to an association. So I might, this is just maybe my preference. We may want, because this one is to a much larger group than I think other communications that are currently dealt with in Board Policy 2004, I actually might recommend that we put means of communication from the board to school employees, just to make it very clear that this is really specific to this section of code. And I heard what you were saying, we might want to put it in but I would think that the defined term might be different if we put it in 100, because do we want every single communication from the board? Because
No.
yeah.
And I would be fine about putting it in here. I just don't want to put something in a policy that could easily be dealt with in this rule or in that general definitional rule. I don't want to send people different places if we don't need to. So I think that's an important thing to just handle right now. And if you think that's the best wording, I'm fine with that. I just we're making this more complicated. We can just put what we mean in this rule.
Okay, member Hart.
She said what I was going to say. And I'll make that motion to add that language as Angie described, if that's appropriate at this time.
I had told Vice Chair Carey I would circle back to him for a motion, but then let's get something on the floor we can build on it. Vice Chair Carey.
Yeah, I'm just concerned, board leadership currently has taken the position that they don't need to show us correspondence that's going to one person. I find that troubling enough to pass a rule that now they don't have to show us correspondence that's going to 50,000 people. I find even more troubling. And again, not an indictment on board leadership. I'm sure they have their reasons, but so I'm very comfortable with the language that I have, and I'll propose that, which is an amendment that 17(1)(a), official communication means communication approved by majority vote of the board.
Then I have a question about that, if that's.
Oh, yeah.
So we
yeah,
need
no.
to remove the 2 school employees.
Just make a recommendation. If that's okay. The way. Thank you. The way that kind of more limited phrase that you just gave, it actually could almost do the opposite, which says it's only official if it's approved by the full board, and therefore we could actually send it more than 3 times a year. Do you know what I mean? Because it's almost the opposite.
So if you're saying by adding to school employees would bring it into compliance with the rule and avoid that, I'm fine with
Yeah,
that.
and communication from the board to school employees. Yeah.
Yeah,
approved.
again, I'm not trying to see more correspondence. I'm just trying to see the 3, up to 3 that go to everyone that the law allows.
So let me just restate this motion, make sure it's what Vice Chair Carey is wanting to see here. The motion before the committee is that the committee amend line 17 to read as follows. Official communication means a communication from the board to school employees approved by a majority vote of the board. Is that correct, Vice Chair Carey?
It is, but I do have one question for Deputy Stallings. Would it help? Because again, I am not looking to see all these emails. I'm looking just for these, 3 in this rule. If we added that qualifier to the end of that sentence, would that clarify that? That we say, sent pursuant to 53G 700 or whatever it is.
We could do that. Yeah.
If that would help, because again, I want to avoid the appearance that it's every email. It's just these 3 that could be sent that I'm looking to have this done on.
It's just weird because then it's approved by a majority of the vote. in full course.
I'm just still looking for clarification about a majority vote of the board. Are you intending, Member Carey, for the board to vote on every one of those every 3 or 3 of those every year or whatever it is? Or are you meaning that a majority vote of the board put the requirement in place? I don't want to vote 3 times.
Yeah. And Carol, I agree. If there's a better way of what I don't want to do is this. I don't want to pass this out with no qualifier. If there's a better way to achieve it, I'm all for that, but I just don't see that.
And then I want to say, let's go back to, if the best way to do it is to put it in policy 2004 or something, so that we don't vote. And because the vote could hold up the communication to us, to others. This feels like something that we are putting before the board unnecessarily. So can we not put it someplace that says the process was approved by the board versus the vote has to be approved by make it clear that the communication, the correspondence has to be approved by the board. Does anybody see what I mean?
I do. I see.
So how do we do that?
That was my question to you.
And so Angie, how do we?
Well, so I did add sent pursuant to section 53G7 224. I think this works.
But I see what Carol can speak for herself, but as I understand it, if there's a matter that really needs to go out, and I don't know what it would be, we've survived so far without having this opportunity, but COVID, pick your situation. I could see a board meeting devolving into just a long process because now we're all stuck. It has to go out. And what do you do? And I believe that's what Board Member Lear is trying to address, as am I. I'm not wed to this language. I just want to see something so we're not just saying, hey, board leadership has this power and there's no guidance. And again, it's regardless of who is in that position, I would want the same provision.
So I do have a response now, and I apologize because I was sort of working on the language when you were having your conversation. Currently, whenever there are official communications that the board has wanted to go out to LEAs, the superintendent or staff has done that on your behalf. And we do that by sending it to the superintendents and charter directors. And then with the expectation that they will send them on. So if there is something urgent, like during COVID, when there were urgent communications needed, our conduit generally is to those direct leaders of the superintendents and charter directors, and then letting them use their discretion on who within their LEA needs to receive the communication. And there have been times that the superintendent or staff have done that on behalf of the board because of a vote. Maybe the board has, some big resolution was approved or a rule or an emergency order during the pandemic. I feel like the first 3 or 4, or in fact, every board meeting we had for a year, we were addressing waivers or directives to support LEAs and either giving them authority or eliminating barriers, so to speak. And we would communicate that. Staff would communicate that to those leaders on your behalf. They just wouldn't be going out to all 60,000 employees. They'd be going to the superintendent, charter director, and then they would distribute it how they saw fit.
And I look at every step in that process as a check, right? So if board leadership says, hey, send this out, they have to go to the superintendent, goes to staff, then it goes to the LEA or charter heads to make a decision, do I pass this on? We are getting rid of all those checks. And what we're saying is a partisan body, who is us, now has no checks on what goes out 3 times a year. That's what I'm trying to address, because we're removing all that independent judgment is now gone, and a partisan body gets to decide what message are we going to push out.
Can the superintendency, I mean, I get that the legislature wants these emails and they'll do what they do. Can the superintendency just keep doing what it's doing? Right, and the board, like if we have to Vice Chair Carey's point, like this is a law that the legislature has put forth, and we're essentially saying in the law, because again we're going over definitions here, but essentially we're saying in the law portion, the superintendent shall send a data collection request, and then as required in section 53G dash whatever, and LEA shall provide the superintendent with the work addresses. So I'm trying to, I don't know where we are. We're kind of in this space here. We're defining a definition, but the meat here, in my opinion, is the superintendent will say, give us the data. The schools will then give us the data. Why do we need to change our communication at all?
Yeah. I just don't want to vote. I don't want to vote 3 times a year and take a 3-minute discussion into a
Right.
45-minute
It becomes a resolution every time, right? Which is hours of debate.
I don't. So whatever language says, we establish a procedure that the board has approved, that this will be, that the statute will be satisfied. I mean, it seems like we are,
Matt, if you give
over baking this to a fault.
If Matt can give us the assurance that 2004 is going to come up, I'm happy to roll the dice on the wisdom of this committee. I'm not saying this has to be the language. I've just seen it before where, hey, do this today, we'll circle back and get this done. and getting it done is another 8 months down the road. I don't want that to happen. So if you're saying, hey, Joe, we'll get to this, then that's great. But if we can't, then like I said, look, no big deal. We vote, I lose, we move on. But I just think it's a mistake generally to say, let's pass this and then we'll address it over here.
Right.
That seems to be a bad,
Well, let me, before we turn to Member Hart, let me just, this was in my thoughts about 25 minutes ago, but I didn't say anything. Maybe I should have. I thought, well, maybe we just take this item, move it, because we can get through these other things. We've got a couple of repeals. Anyway, I think we can. I don't mind putting it towards the end and just bumping it to put it closer to 2004, but we'll need to do it very quickly. Member Hart.
So this rule talks about the requirement in law, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the board doesn't get to say yes or no as to whether or not this gets sent out. So I see no reason that this rule has to have any other procedures, because there is no decision point for the board. It gets sent out, period. It's a law. It's sent out. So what I think you're probably addressing is other communications and concerns about other communications. But for this one, there's for the law, it's just the law.
I agree with Molly, but so the legislature gets to send 3 out,
Right.
but then we added, the board gets to send 3 out.
And
They did, right. I'm saying right. So I'm not trying to stop them from doing it. I'm saying,
so you're talking about the 3 that are not coming from legislature.
correct.
Okay.
They do what they do.
Okay.
Go ahead.
That's
I'll try to
Our
dig.
3 may be to counter the 3 they're sending out. I have no idea, but you
Okay.
know.
All right.
One thing to your
That's
point, and I think this has kind of come up. Number one, the board didn't advocate for that authority. I think the legislature felt like when they are doing it, because they were aware that the board's current communication protocol, including staff, is that we do not send emails directly to the 30 to 60, but we have kind of a line of authority where we send it to the superintendent or charter director in the district, et cetera. So I think part of the reason why we haven't had this discussion as a board about what that would look like is because it wasn't a request of the board. And 2, I think Board Member Hymas made this point, there's nothing that says even though we have that authority, it doesn't mean we actually have to use it. You could continue to use the communication methods that you always have, which is to, have it sent to the leaders of the district and charter, and then rely on them and their discretion to send it forward. So
just with my experiences on the board and currently sitting in leadership, I would prefer that any requirements that board leadership has be in 2004 rather than scattered in other provisions. I'm perfectly fine to amend the agenda and go right to 2004 if you want to do that, just to ensure it's there. But it increases the chance of compliance if it's all in 2004 rather than somewhere else. So whatever we have to do that, if it's here, I'm worried that 7 years down the road, someone's like, oh, gosh, we were supposed to. And I just like it better there.
Let me ask the committee. I don't mind. I think we can bring back 2004. I don't mind addressing it right now and spending about 30 minutes on it. We do have other items to get to. So I want to increase efficiency here. That's what I'm requesting of the committee. So how would I do that? Do I need to do a formal thing and jump to 2004? Ben or Angie, I'm looking at you guys.
do a couple of the repeals and give Ben and I a time to maybe draft something that could be a starting point, unless we want to. Is that?
Okay. Let's do it. So we're going to just table this for a second or postpone.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Usually definitions are in there because they're used in the rule. Where is official communication used in the remainder of the rule? Where I know it's a short
No,
rule.
that's
so
what I
I'm
brought
like,
up. It's mentioned 3 times. That's what I'm saying. It's mentioned 3 times in there, but I think where it is you're going to find it in the law.
Okay,
as
so that's
official
why it's
communication. So
pursuing
that's
to
why we
those
need to
rules
define
that
this.
you're putting it in there. Okay, because I
Yeah.
was like, it's only what 30 lines, and I'm not seeing it. So okay.
If I could make a comment, sometimes the only thing we put in the rule are defined terms to clarify, because for example, official communication is not a defined term. School campus is not a defined term. So we're just providing some clarity on, and this has only come up because LEAs have asked these questions. Like I said, right after the session, we had no intention of doing a rule at all. But as questions have come up and people have said, well, we have teachers that aren't on a campus, they work virtually. So does that include them? Those were the types of questions that came up that led to this.
Thank you. Let's we're gonna move forward. We're gonna jump to, and I get that Ben, you're on 2.9 and Elise is on 2. As she, okay, can we do these? Can we look at these repeals and give Angie a minute? So let's jump to agenda item 2.9, recognizing that we are not finished with 2.7. We haven't started with 2.8. We're going to jump to 2.9, R277-327 School Leadership Development Grant. This is a repeal. Ben, if you can multitask and get 2004 done and this, that would be fantastic at the same time. We're looking at agenda item 2.9. Yeah.
This is just, the proposal is just to repeal this rule because there's no more funding for the program. So the rule is no longer needed.
I'll make that motion if somebody put it on the board.
I don't know. Let me, as they're looking at that, I wonder if I can just make the motions if I just have it on my screen here. Oh, Member Wood, do you mind?
Why is it not on the?
I move that the committee repeal R277-327 on first reading and recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Wood. The motion before the committee is that the committee repeal R277-327 on first reading and recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading. Those in favor say aye.
I have one question.
Sorry,
one question.
Sorry.
So
Vote. Go ahead.
Are there funds available in other areas where we're working on school leadership?
That I don't know, and I don't, both of our staff. Okay, we've got Sarah coming forward.
Hi, Sarah Wibke, Director of Continuous School Improvement. We do have a school leadership development program that we run in the school improvement section that is additional funds for leadership development. And I'm not sure if Quinn has others.
Thank you.
Is that limited to TSI, CSI, or is that separate?
Great question. It is limited to if they are meeting certain designations of school improvement. You are correct.
Quinn, are there, Dr. Anyway, you can introduce yourself when you get here. It's my friend. Do you have any other resources for school leadership development?
Good morning, Quinn Kellis, Leadership Development Coordinator. There are actually quite a few initiatives around the agency that focus on leadership development. Each one carries some budget for their various initiatives.
Okay, so the motion before the committee is that the committee repeal R277-327 on first reading and recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading. Seeing no other lights for discussion, let's vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Moving on to agenda item 2.10, R277-321, paraeducator to teacher scholarship program. This is another repeal. And
This is
Ben.
the same story. The legislature taketh away, and so we don't need the rule anymore.
Member Hart?
Can someone refresh my memory on how this was different than the Grow Your Own? Can
you speak to that?
can you speak to how this program was different than the Grow Your Own?
Hi, Malia Height, Executive Coordinator of Educator Licensing. This scholarship was specific to special education, and Grow Your Own was for teachers and school counselors.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or?
Was it not successful or the legislature didn't like it or was it? And just the shortest possible answer
Funding was ceased by the legislature
for whatever reason.
for whatever reason.
Thank you.
I think a lot of it was you got grow your own and release people into that.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I don't know if you want to repeat that.
I'll repeat that. So with the introduction of the Grow Your Own program, individuals had access to a similar program, including the special education people.
Which is why we should advocate for the Grow Your Own. Thank you.
Just a little plug there. Yeah, well. Okay, so I'm gonna move. I'll move that the committee repeal R277-321 on first reading and recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. That passes. Oh, any opposed? That passes unanimously. Okay, so Angie would like a little more time. So can we jump back to 2.8? Let's take a 2-minute break. Thank you.
Thank you for
Committee members, let's start gathering. If you can hear me in the hallway, we still have a lot of.
Yes.
I would agree that it's not 2 minutes. I'd say 4 to 5 minutes. Yeah. We got a lot to cover, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go to agenda item 2.8, R277-600, student transportation standards, and Ben will tee us up.
All right, so on this rule, we've got just a few substantive changes here that I'll just highlight. We've added the oversight category before for this rule because there's a lot of money there that staff is monitoring. The other changes, you'll see we've deleted the definition for the Pupil Transportation Advisory Committee. That's because the statute that created that committee has been repealed. There was one reference to that committee that we've also removed. And then the other significant change that we've made is the very last section of the rule, the Rural School District Transportation Grant Program. Yet another grant here that we're talking about, the legislature has discontinued funding on. So section 13 of this rule is no longer needed, and the proposal is to strike that.
Thank you, Ben. I guess I didn't realize how many, you go through these legislative sessions and I didn't realize so many things were struck, I guess.
There seems to be a lot that are up here today. That's for sure.
And I know they're just, well, I don't know much, but I believe they're just moving things around. But anyway, any questions from committee members? I see Member Lear has a light on. Is that for a question here? Go ahead, Member Lear.
Yeah, and I'm trying to scroll to the bottom of this to remind myself. I know there's a handbook that goes with school transportation, but that handbook is not part of this rule. It's in a separate rule, that manual to be incorporated by reference, because I know I know it has a lot of
Ron Litchfield is our specialist. He is online. Maybe he can.
If Ron would, and so that was one question. I had one other question that was about the advisory committee, which, as I recall, was super helpful to the state specialist. And I wondered if he has any of that if the state specialist has that in an informal way, or if the legislature took this away too, took away the advisory committee.
Yes.
And so is Ron. And hi Ron. Yo, yes. So I wondered, if you have any advisory committee that you're able to work with anymore, and secondly, where is the transportation manual incorporated by reference in rules?
Okay, Chair, if I may, this is Ron Litchfield, the transportation specialist at the State Board of Education, and our Utah transportation rules are actually based in UDOT's administrative rules. So they're approved by us, our manual, and then it's approved by DOT. The second piece on the Transportation Advisory Committee, the committee is a makeup of 3 superintendents, 3 business administrators, and 3 transportation directors. And I've worked very hard to improve the communication at USBE to those groups. And so even with this committee repealed, I believe there will still be great communication and getting their opinions on things that could affect transportation in the future.
Okay. I think it's odd that you can't choose to have your advisory committee if you want it, but I'll just leave that if you feel the communication's adequate. And again, thank you for the answer on the manual.
Thank you, Member Lear. I don't see any other lights. If someone would like to put a motion forth. Member Wood,
I move that the committee approve R277-6. Oh, that's the one, right?
that is the one.
600. Okay.
600, yes.
Yes. Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Wood. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-600 Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That passes unanimously. Let's continue to move on. Well, these other items are being prepared. Well, let me take a second and ask staff. Okay, let's move on to agenda item 2.11.
Stay here.
R277-324 paraprofessional. R277-324 paraprofessional paraeducator programs, assignments, and qualifications. And Ben's going to tee us up.
So this is related to the repeal of 321 that came along with the repeal of that grant program. What is happening here is there is some language that's proposed to delete from this rule as a result of that. That change is what I understand is happening here. And then they've also moved a couple of definitions that were in this rule into this rule. So since they're not going to be in that rule anymore is how I understood that from Elise. So those were the 2 major changes here. Happy to see if we can answer any questions if you have any.
Ben, I do have one, Chair, I do have one question.
Please, Vice Chair Carey. You should.
Oh, thank you. The definition provided in lines 34 through 40, was that pulled directly from statute? Or is that our interpretation of the definition?
My understanding was that came from the prior rule. You get your mic on. Sorry. My understanding was they moved that from 321 that we just repealed to this rule. I'm not sure where they drew it from. This was one that Elise drafted. We have staff that can answer that.
Any special ed staff.
I'm only, it's not as, I just couldn't find it. So I was just wondering where it came from. If it came from the prior rule.
That was my understanding was they put it here because of the repeal of the prior rule.
Yeah, we don't need to track anyone down.
Is it out of the special education manual? Is that why you were asking? Okay.
Okay, I couldn't find it. That's fine. That question's been answered. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. Member Wood.
Oh, sorry.
No problem.
Do you want me to do a motion?
Yeah, if you were willing.
Okay. That the committee approves R277-324 Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Wood. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-324 Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Let's go to agenda item 2.12 R277-625 student mental health amendments. Ben.
So on this rule, basically the changes are that they are inserting a date. You'll see that on line 69 and 70, that each LEA has to notify the superintendent, yes or no, whether they want to participate in the mental health screeners grant program. There is just a minor tweak on the language about the LEAs participating in this when they have to do the training for the program. And then there's some language on lines 139 through 145 that talks about how the superintendent will distribute funding for that program. Michelle Knight is online if you have any questions about the program and how this is working.
Open to any questions from the committee. We'll give a second to process here. Ben, you said that this is not voluntary. What is it when you optional? That's right.
Yeah, we do require LEAs to notify us what option they're taking, but I think they can opt in or out.
Okay.
Is my understanding.
Yeah, so they are required to say, yes, we are opting in. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Member Lear.
I move that the committee approves R277-625 draft 1 on first reading and forwards to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-625 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Is there discussion to this motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? That passes unanimously. Let me just speak ask the committee what we want to do here. We have 2.13 and 2.14 are both sunset items. I don't know if there has been any questions or do we feel like there's going to be debate on here? If we can look through these, I know I bring this to the committee. I've already had opportunity to talk about these, so I don't have one, but I don't want to rob the committee of anything. And I want to give sufficient time without trying to hop back and forth. So, Member Wood?
I just wanted to compliment staff because I read the memo and my first thoughts are like, how many people are using this? Do we need it? And then I went back to the backup and voila, there's these wonderful presentations that answer all your questions. And so it was just so nice to have all the information there to begin with.
Great job, staff. Member Hart, do you have any, not saying you don't have any comments. Do we want to, where are you at on going forward with these and tackling these now? Are you okay to do that? And Vice Chair Carey, I'd ask you the same thing, looking at these. Okay. Ben, this is Greg. Or are you going to do those?
Sure, we're very good.
Okay, well.
Have other stuff.
Okay, let's keep moving forward. We're on agenda item 2.13, Education Interim Committee Sunset Item, Section 53F-5-214, Grant for Professional Learning, and we have Julie Clark who's going to tee us up.
Julie will do her best. I will do my best, but.
Yeah.
And is it?
Angie, just for context.
I was gonna say, I could even go with the slides. Go ahead, Angie.
I can provide a quick background. So every year, the legislature has a number of sunset items related to education, and those are reviewed by the Education Interim Committee. And before the Education Interim Committee takes action, they have traditionally asked for a recommendation from the board, which they did again this year. And so as you'll see in the slides, and I know Greg would be teeing this up, there are 3 potential actions that the legislature would take. And so our recommendations generally fall into one of those 3 categories. The three categories are the legislature could take no action, meaning that item is just going to be repealed as of generally, these are all going to be repealed July 1, 2025. Number two, they could extend the sunset date, say for 3 years or 5 years, which happens from time to time, or they could remove the sunset completely, which means the program stays indefinitely until the legislature decides to pass legislation to repeal it. So those are the three options. Staff considered those three options. And in each of these, you'll see that staff have provided a recommendation for you that then, but you still have those three options of recommendations in the three categories. But the recommendation that staff will be providing falls into one of the three. Greg.
Thank you, Deputy Stallings. So our first one up is the grant for professional learning, and I have Julie Clark with me as well. This is section of code 53F-5-214. And what this section of code did is it provided a grant where teachers could receive money for training in early literacy and in mathematics. As Deputy Stallings explained, we've been asked to give a recommendation from the USBE to the legislature on our thoughts on this part of code sunsetting. It's up for review right now, and it is scheduled to be repealed with that sunset if no action is taken. So there's three actions that Deputy Stallings also explained. We could take no action. That means it sunsets, and this grant would be repealed by July 1st, 2025. We could draft a committee bill to change the sunset date, or we could draft a bill to remove the sunset date. And the interim committee is looking for a recommendation from this board on what we feel would be best. And the recommendation that staff has provided is that the committee allowed this code to not sunset.
And are you asking permanently? Like you said, one of the options was to, push it out another few years or something. Are you just saying we're asking the legislature not to allow this to sunset permanently? Is that what the recommendation is?
Yes, that would be. Yes, that would be the recommendation.
Can we take questions in the middle? I know I interrupted as well, but Member Hart, go ahead.
I'm actually going to make a motion, then we can talk about it. Okay. I move that the committee recommends that the legislature not allow Utah Code Section 53F-5-214 grant for professional learning to sunset and forward the recommendation to the board for approval. I can tell you that grant is one of the last things left standing, quite frankly. And without that, I don't. We've rolled a bunch of programs up into the add-on. Fine, that's great. That's wonderful. This grant allows, in fact, I sat in a meeting, 2 meetings, actually, all-day meetings where we determined what we were going to do. That grant is the backbone of professional learning for teachers and schools. It's very clear. It's very flexible. But yet it has a very clear process for applying for and getting those funds. I wish that if we had other programs, that it would be folded into this grant rather than for this grant to go away. We often forget that our teachers are not static. Just because we trained them last year doesn't mean that we don't have, in some cases, up to 50% turnover in subjects or grades or teachers. And ongoing professional development is an absolute necessity. This is something I strongly feel.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hart. The motion before the committee is that the committee recommends that the legislature not allow Utah Code Section 53F-5-214 grant for professional learning to sunset and forward the recommendation to the board for approval. Any other discussion to this motion? Greg, and I don't know if you want to speak to this anymore. I think, in my opinion, it's already sold, so I'd try to just stay there, but let's go ahead and vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Let's move on to agenda item 2.14, Education Interim Committee Sunset Item, Section 53F-5-215, Elementary Teacher Preparation Grant. And again, we have Greg and Jennifer Thronson.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair Hymas, Greg Cannell, Policy Analyst, and with me, Director Jennifer Thronson with Teaching and Learning. Today we're reviewing elementary teacher preparation grants. This is section of code is 53F-5-215. And again, we're seeking recommendations from this board on the sunsetting of this particular code. This code started in September 1st, 2021. And it allowed the state board to award grants to educators in preparation programs for the cost of the initial attempt of the required literacy preparation assessment for their licensing. Again, with this code, it's scheduled to be repealed July 1st, 2025, and our options are the same. We can take no action, allowing it to repeal. We can change the sunset date, or we can try and move the sunset date to remove the sunset date.
And similarly, Greg, when I say you, I refer to staff, is asking that this just not sunset, that this is just a permanent part of what we do here. Okay.
Yes, and the trick with this one is this just repeals the funding. It doesn't repeal the requirement. So if this gets repealed, they still have the requirement to take the assessment. It's just no longer paid for. So that is why we would request that it would be indefinitely. And, of course, if the test gets repealed, then the funding would get repealed. But to repeal the funding impacts teachers negatively.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to make a motion here if there's no questions. I know we have this in backup, and if it's okay, I move that the committee recommends that the legislature not allow Utah Code 53F-5-215 teacher preparation grant to sunset, but extend the effective date and forward the recommendation to the board for approval. Speaking to this, recognizing that the legislature, this is just a recommendation to the legislature. We know that, we've been doing this for a long time. So this is our recommendation. If they still do repeal, or they still do say, no, we're going to sunset it, we're still under Utah Code to have this. We just have to find the money for it somewhere.
Teachers will.
Vice Chair Carey.
Chair, just a quick question, and I apologize if I missed this. Was there any reason given why they allowed the grant to expire, not renew it? Like, what was their reasoning?
It's just automatically set at 5 years on this particular one. So we have many parts of this. This was a larger bill at that time, and everything in it was a 5-year kind of experience. But they only are repealing this part and not the actual requirement. So for me, it's about the future teacher, the impact to their pocketbook, the requirement still in place.
The legislature does this for a number of programs every 5 years. UPAC is the same. We have to go up there, justify its continuation of the legislature every 5 years. So it's just a common practice for the legislature.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. So the motion before the committee is that the committee recommends that the legislature not allow Utah Code 53F-5-215 teacher preparation grant to sunset, but extend the effective date and forward the recommendation to the board for approval. Seeing no other lights for discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Jennifer. We are going to move to agenda item 2.16, Board Policy 2004. And I have, as individuals here, I have Ben Rasmussen and Committee Vice Chair Joseph Carey. So I don't know if you want Ben to start or you to start, but either one is
I
fine.
will go ahead and start and explain the difference between the drafts, and then we can discuss the policy proposals.
Before Ben starts, just, and Ben, would you, when you describe that, the chronology of it would be helpful to me too. Which one, to the extent it's, I know they're numbered, but it'd be helpful
that's
to
what I
know
wanna
what
explain.
precipitated what.
Greg has left his screen connected, so I'm waiting for him to disconnect.
Let me go find him.
Vanessa's going to do it. There we go. Let's see, disconnect Greg. There we go. What did you do? Almost there. Sorry about this. Okay. Okay. So, little history. So this went to the board last month. And the committee at that time had sent draft 3 as the committee's recommendation to the board. At the same time, Vice Chair Earl had made some proposed suggestions. That was draft 4. After the board discussed this and couldn't come to a resolution, it was sent back to committee, and it was recommended that the attorney generals look at the policy and determine if there was anything that they would recommend changing based on recent legal changes. So just want to highlight this. If you look in 2C, the only change that Michelle, in all of them, yeah, and it's on the screen there. The only thing that that Michelle recommended striking was the language there that a member is encouraged to accept participation requests and not block public commenters on social media. Based on the recent decisions handed down by the court, she felt like that was no longer warranted. So that is the same in any of the drafts. But so now 5. I have taken Michelle's word on that. I haven't really researched that carefully.
I'll talk to Michelle.
Is Michelle on the Zoom? Ash, we can ask Ashley Beal. She's on the Zoom call.
I'm here. Sorry. What was the question?
Well, so
let's just do it. We're time is sensitive, so let me.
Okay.
Ashley, we're going to pause and move forward. We might come back to you.
So,
okay.
So 5 then is the original committee draft plus that language stricken. 6 is Vice Chair Earl's draft with that language stricken. Now 7, which you would be taking the committee draft and adding the language that you see on the screen. There's
just an updated version.
Okay.
So to that while he gets the version up. Is that all right? So board, just quickly, I had sent the language and board member Carrie reviewed it. And I did add a subsection D with an emergency clause that says if it's an emergency, essentially the 72 hours is waived. So while Ben is pulling that up, there's 2 options in there. The first one kind of aligns with the process that board leadership is using for other communications where the board, in this case, it would be board leadership doing it on behalf of the board, drafts an official communication and would send it. That's still not the right one.
It's scanning my attachment.
Oh, okay. Okay. But I'll just describe it in general while we get the right one up. We have really tight security here, which is good. It takes a bit. They scan it to make sure there's no malware or whatever. So what it essentially states is that board leadership would send a draft of the official communication to the full board and wait 72 hours. And if there's feedback, they could update it again, send it out for another 72 hours, and then send it out. There is an emergency exception, which Ben's showing it now because I've copied and pasted it into an email, so that's probably easier to see now. That would just say if there's an emergency, that they just have to send it to the board before sending, but they don't have to wait 72 hours. So.
Yeah, jump in. Just use your mic, will you?
Thank you. So Angie, just for clarification, that part in green would only apply to the new law that was passed with up to these 3 emails. And to make clear, it's my understanding of what I wanted was that board leadership drafts it, they send it to all of us for review, but in no way, shape, form, or fashion does the board dictate changes, but rather that's provided to us for review and to give our feedback. Board leadership is free to accept or reject that.
Correct. So I put in B, during the 72 hours described in, and actually it should be 6A. Board members may provide feedback to board leadership for their consideration. And then I just state if board leadership amends the draft communication, the updated draft. And I didn't even say that whether it was because of board feedback or maybe some other information came to light, that they do send it to board members again. And that one, I wasn't sure if you wanted to require it to be 72 hours again, or if you just want it sent. I just put that it's sent. So, there you go.
Quick question. How does that not violate Open Meeting Act? Because if you're sending something out and now it's creating some type of dialogue among board membership, how would that not violate OPMA?
It is a draft. I think what we might need to do during the 72 hours described in 6A, a board member, let's do it that way, a board member may provide feedback directly to board leadership, which means you wouldn't respond to the full board when you're providing board leadership for their consideration.
It's still subject to grandma.
It is still subject to grandma, but I think the concern is it could be a discussion if the feedback is coming almost like, oh, well, I didn't like that. You know, you might have the two of you, board member Wood and Hymas, kind of going back and forth in email, and you're right, that would violate Open and Public Meetings Act. But if you, board member Wood, were to send it only to board leadership, you don't have a quorum of the board, you're giving that feedback for their consideration. So I think that's maybe that is something that we could help put like in the email body when board leadership sends it out that states, do not respond to the full board. If you have feedback, please send it directly to the 3 members of board leadership or Sybil for her to forward. So that's how I think we would handle it.
Can I interrupt for a second, Angie?
Yes.
No, you're fine. You can leave that on. This satisfies, and will you stay up there for a second? On the option, I guess that's option 1. I didn't know there were multiple options. We can look at the other ones. I'm wondering if this satisfies what the concerns were for R277-482, the school personnel email addresses. And if it does, then we can vote on the rule to make sure that that gets out and then jump back here to 2004 before going, because I know there's other areas that we want to discuss. Is that so? If this is okay with the committee,
Option 1,
yeah, and we need to look at option 2, right?
the one that required the vote after.
And nobody, yeah.
My recommendation is option 1.
So committee members, let's look back at when this is typed. Let's look back at option 1. And what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to focus just for a second on just that green so that we can jump back to the rule, get the rule taken care of, and then we'll cover the rest of 2004.
If you go to the Ben, no, I'm sorry. I meant, so what we have, if you remember, we had 2 options for the amendment to the rule. One was to clarify majority vote, which it sounds like we're moving away from. The second one would state, and let me put that the committee, this.
The second one, we would just leave the rule. Is that right?
Well, I think that just to be clear so that people know where the protocol is, you're right, we don't need to do this. We could actually leave the rule as is. But if you wanted to, you could put means in the official communication sent by the board as described in board policy 2004. So you're right, you don't need to. It's an option. So if you'd like to just.
Let's ask the committee. Let's use some mics and.
Another
I
issue
do have
first.
a recommendation. I will say my default preference is never to bind the board in its own board rules. So I would say to move the rule without the amendment, but I understand if there's concerns that you could put that in there.
Thank you. Member Lear has a comment.
I have a question. I think this implicates, and I don't want to get too technical or unnecessarily so. I think there's two concerns. Grandma's one concern, Open and Public Meetings Act is another concern. But if this is a draft, and we might want to put that language in there that a draft communication shall be sent, then it's not subject to grandma because we haven't acted on it. Wouldn't you both, Angie, Ben, would you not agree?
And
I said, if it's a draft, it's not subject to grandma.
Drafts can be classified as protected. under
Right.
grandma.
So we don't have to worry about the grandma element there. And that still might leave open the question of open a public meeting if it seems that the board's discussing this in a group email. So that still might require some statement that, either a board member may respond or something along those lines. But I don't think we need to worry if we would make sure that it's designated draft, then it's not subject to grandma. And
if there's a discussion, Carol?
My understanding is that a draft is a protected document unless it's used unless it's used in some way officially.
Generally, what the law says is you classify the draft as protected as long as the final document is released.
But what about to
Well, and
your
I didn't
point?
remember the last part, but as long as it's also not used, you can't just use it as a ruse. You can't just call it a draft and then start acting on it. That's my.
But what about the communication? You're saying the communication is still grammable because it's going back and forth. Like they wouldn't get the document, but they could get the
yes.
email where you suggest changes.
Yes, I can't see any way.
When I
that
say
could be
they, I mean,
protected,
I
but
don't want to sound like conspiracy, but
no,
I'm just saying
I
it's
can
open.
see that
Yeah.
that the exchange, but the document itself, I think, can be protected as long as it's a draft. And I didn't remember the last part of what Ben said. We could look again at the definition of draft as in grandma, but I don't think we need to worry unnecessarily about it. But I do think it would be helpful to add to this green, and Ben or Angie, if we can go back to that green for a second. I think it'd be helpful to add to that green somewhere, official communication sent pursuant, except as provided if the board or leadership seeks to send to school employees as described before sending the official communication. So the board leadership shall send I just say a draft copy of the communication as opposed to a draft communication, draft copy of the communication. Or even if you want to be really like put emphasis on it, if you want to say a copy labeled draft or something along those lines.
I like your first one.
Okay. So that then designates it as draft, and then we know that, and it works both ways. That means that board members should not share it, and it means that it's protected under grandma.
Thank you, Member Lair. Will committee members just take a couple minutes and read through this? I want to make sure that this section is correct before we jump back to the rule.
Okay.
And make sure
Can
we're
you
not.
can you do
missing
1 plus? Oh, I can look at it right behind me. Sorry, never mind.
Yes, section B there, if we could put that during the 72 hours described in section 6A, a board member may provide feedback. That will just make me feel more comfortable.
A board member may, yeah.
Do we need to put in something that says do not reply all, or is that just kind of a given? I know we're implying it by saying a board member may, but I can reply all and offer that feedback. But what we're trying to say is we're trying to stay out of the Open Meetings Act here. We don't want to get into this big back and forth. We just want a board member to give feedback. So I'm going to defer kind of to Vice Chair Carey on some of that as well.
What about what about Angie individually?
I may provide feedback separately to board leadership.
Individually to board leadership.
Individually.
Individually is better because separately to board leadership just means I have to email Jim, Molly, and Jenny.
And maybe that says the same thing. And then for consideration, can you just grammatically indulge me for consideration? Because leadership's really a singular. Amends the draft. The updated draft shall be sent to board members before sending the official communication. Go twice if an official. Yeah, so let's not spend a lot of time on that. It feels a little laborious, but I'm fine with it. Option 2.
Yeah, I like where this is going. I'm okay with it. Committee members, any thoughts or changes before we jump back to the rule?
Is this one more thought? And it's just, it's a question. This back and forth has taken place now. On number 4, go down, or the ABCD, board leadership. Are we now creating an expectation among other board members that the leadership shall send, or is it still a may? On D, the second line on D.
Sending an emergency would be a draft.
Official communication. Oh, yeah. I get it. Yeah, never mind. You're right. It's related to the emergency. Never mind.
May I make a comment? So somebody sent to me an idea, which I don't know if we want to reference this specifically in the policy, but then when board leadership sends it in A, to just put the board email address in the BCC so that if people respond or reply, it would only go to the person who sent it, whether that's Sybil or it's.
You want to get some technical?
Sure. Would that be good if we put BCC, blind copy? I think is what it's called. I don't know the official. Yeah. Thanks, Royce.
Oh, it's Royce's idea now.
Never mind.
Yeah.
Did you raise your hand?
So let's read A, and then is that where you'd put the stuff about that BCC?
Yeah, it's just board leadership shall blind copy for draft bill.
Okay. Committee members, let's jump back then to agenda item 2.7, R277-482, school personnel email addresses.
Sorry, one more thought on that, you guys. This is so wordy. Can we, if I can help just a little bit, can you scroll back up one more time? Just one little thing where it says there's full board members. I think shall send an official communication. No. It's no, let's see. Oh, sorry.
Well, I was looking for that on A, instead of saying to all members of the full board, shouldn't it just say?
Yes, that's what I was looking for. To all board members.
We've gotten rid of full twice now. Yesterday.
Yes, clearly full is not a good word.
Yes.
A draft copy to all board members by, why don't we say shall email blind, so we can get rid of by email too. Okay, that's great.
We're done.
In advance of sending the official communication. Okay, that got rid of like, what, 10 words? That's good. All right, thanks.
Yeah, let's go back to the rule. Again, this is
It's actually draft 2.
R277-482 school personnel email addresses, and we're looking at draft 2. There was a mistake in draft 1 that's been
What
fixed.
showed on screen was 2. It's been uploaded. Sorry.
Oh.
Let me explain.
No,
I just wanted to make sure that the motion wasn't 1.
no,
We
you're
were
good.
talking about draft 2.
There was a mistake on draft 1. We fixed it. Now it's draft 2. We've been working off draft 2. There, explain. Sorry, Angie. So we don't have a motion yet for this rule. Is somebody willing to put this motion forward?
Just maybe this will. Maybe this will help 5 of us in the board meeting conversation eventually. Molly, as a member of board leadership, bring out your most candid self. How do you feel about this?
I am perfectly, yes. I am perfectly fine with this. I am perfectly, anytime that something is spelled out, that the board members expect leadership to do, that is perfectly fine with me. I have no concerns that, I mean, they just board leadership wants to serve. And
I know you're giving you.
Yeah.
Don't give me the, I mean.
No, I mean it. I mean it. They really truly want to serve. And if it clarifies and it sets the record straight about what they're doing, what I cannot stand is this implication, there are these undertones that board leadership is nefarious in their actions. Really, we just want it to go smooth. And if writing this rule and having this spelled out makes people feel better, I'm a A+ 100%.
And do you feel like it's too,
No.
it's not too circuitous or too complicated?
No, not at all. Yeah, and
that's great.
Checklists are great.
Thank you. Thank you. Helpful information. Thanks.
Member Wood,
I have a motion.
please.
I move the committee approve R277-482 draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Wood. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-482 draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All in favor say aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Let's jump back to agenda item 2.16, board policy 2004, board member communications. And I don't know if we've already teed it up. Let's just jump back into the discussion.
Yeah.
Vice Chair Carey.
Let me just, at the last board meeting, it seemed part of the concern was, and I thought we addressed it adequately, but apparently not. There was concern that this was overly comprehensive, that we were looking for emails about lunch orders and administrative things. So I would welcome ideas and feedback on language changes we could make to make even more clear that the only correspondence we really are looking for is correspondence addressed to all 3 board members.
Are we, let me just ask a clarifying question. Are we working off of draft 6, draft 7, draft? What draft are we working off of?
The committee's motion plus the AG's edit plus the city line. Draft 8 would be if you want to go with vice chair.
But I don't see it in our.
It's just, we have,
So you want to look at 5 or 6?
okay, 5 or 6.
See, and there's the committee's motion. Draft 6 is vice chair Earl's motion, and then we've added this language in green here on the slide.
So which one should we look at in our backup?
To work. You want to work from vice chair Earl?
I don't care. Just
I would say the committees.
5.
5, okay. And then,
That was the new language.
yeah, Vice Chair Carey, will you tell us where, I mean, where exactly, what section are you saying you're trying to
I really
clarify?
don't know, because when I read it, it strikes me as very clear that the only correspondence we are looking for are those that are addressed to board leadership, all three, and whether that's received by them or being sent in response to it. But again, the major feedback at the board was it's too aggressive. Like there's too much that would have to be turned over. And so I don't know, because as I reread this, I thought this seems pretty clear. If we need to tighten it up by saying, look, address to all three relating to policy, that's fine. But really, I would look to Angie and Ben to say, what is it in here that I'm missing that makes this perceptionally, they're looking for too much?
Thank you. So it says on 4A of draft 5 and 6, and I looked at 6 just to see just remind myself what the change recommendation was, but it says if an elected public official sends correspondence addressed to all members of board leadership. So again, you mentioned, like lunch, stuff that doesn't really matter. If an elected public official, what is that? Is that us as well? Like if I sent an email to leadership, requesting, you know what I mean? So I wonder if these are the types of things that people are picking at and saying, well, if I want to ask leadership to go to a training, I don't really care if you guys, I don't want you to know that, maybe, right? So maybe that needs to be looked at. Member Wood, you have a comment?
Well, and I'm looking at whether electronic or otherwise. I texted 3 board member or leadership last month and asked if we could do executive higher up so that I could leave for my son's graduation. Yeah. So there was electronic or otherwise. So now that text that says, hey, this is a selfish request, but my son's graduating. Can we move this up so I can still be engaged? Does that need to go out to everyone? Because 1, it is electronic. 2, it went to all 3 members. And 3, it could be subject to grandma.
And 4, you're a public official.
And I'm an elected public official.
In the spirit of discussion, could it say on a policy issue or on a policy related issue or?
That's already implicated because it's things that are subject to grandma. I think what you're talking about is more a personal note, which probably would not be subject to grandma.
Well, it might. I mean,
it may or may not.
It might be. I'm not. I was going to suggest we eliminate which otherwise because it's not very descriptive for normal people.
It's both. Could we put if an elected public? Sorry. If an elected public official, and I think Angie, you said this, excluding, right, sends correspondence addressed to. I mean, that, because I think that's what Board Member Davis had specifically brought up, her concern that, well, really, the plain reading of this would encompass request for an adjournment and, I'm leaving early, a doctor's appointment. So I would be fine with that. And if subject to grandma needs to be rewritten so it's clear that, it has to be policy related and not personal. Again, I think that's not substantive as much as it is stylistic.
Make it more. I'd like to make it more user friendly. It just feels so garbled the way it's written. Nobody's fault, but it's just like we're piecing together a bunch of things. I don't know. I don't think whether electronic or otherwise is necessary because I think that's if an elected public suggests in this day and age any kind of I don't know if this is a better word, if it's communicates or no, we don't want that. Sends correspondence. I think that suggests or certainly gives a reasonable implication of any kind of sends. Correspondence addressed to all members of board leadership. So you get rid of whether electronic or otherwise. And why would you put which would otherwise be subject to grammar or related to a policy issue, maybe not accepted by GRAMA, EXCEPTE leadership shall, something along those lines, just to make it more readable.
I like the idea of putting parameters on it. Board leadership is up at the Capitol quite a bit. If a legislator develops a relationship and says, hey, sends an email, hey, my son's turning 5, right? You're invited to my kid's birthday party. Is that a course, right? And I'm like, I can't wait to get my invite when that's what I'm saying. Is it in here? Just says addressed to all.
That's what I'm saying, policy related issue or.
And essentially I'm agreeing and saying, yeah, I like the idea of saying something that's, maybe this goes back to more official communication, but as we discuss this and look at the different avenues, these are just some of the, silly things, I guess, that are examples that do actually happen sometimes. Not to me, but I don't, anyway.
Can we look at draft 6? This is a much more simplified version of what's being requested.
So, yeah, that's up there right now.
And this doesn't address the same thing that I just mentioned and that Carol has mentioned.
No, this is Vice Chair Earl's requested edits. The only thing the AG has edited is on 2C, that language in orange. They're recommending striking that paragraph. The language in draft 6 is from Vice Chair Earl, and she basically is recommending that if board leadership gets correspondence that requires a response on behalf of the board, that would be shared.
I don't mind the language. Draft 6 for the end and the beginning.
I think one of the concerns she had, if I remember correctly, is specifically the piece that board leadership would have to go to the person that sent the correspondence, ask for permission to share it.
Look, we wouldn't be here if they didn't sit on the legislative letters that they received, right? I mean,
I'm just sharing what her concern was. I'm not.
Connection for online. Molly, then we'll go back.
So if a letter is sent to 3 individuals, even though they are the leadership of the board, it is not sent that for whatever reason, that person did not say leadership plus or leadership and members of the USBE board. I'm really concerned about a letter being addressed to specific individuals and then turning around and distributing that letter. I just don't feel good about that. If they wanted it to go to the whole board, then they send it to the whole board. Now, I understand that someone can go through the grammar and do all that business, but if they send it to board leadership, then board leadership needs to make some decisions about that before it goes and is distributed widely. I just don't find that respectful. I mean, I just have a hard time with that. Maybe that's the way it has to go, but if we get a letter and it brings up an issue, there's got to be some communication, some conversation with the person that sent it so that they understand that whatever they sent is they're going to get calls from multiple board members. Like they didn't say leadership, or to the USBE board through the leadership, or dear USBE board. They said these 3 individuals. If we just turn around and send it out, then they have no context when any one of the other 12 members calls them on it. And I just don't know that elected officials appreciate that much.
Yeah, I think that when elected officials reach out to the 3 members of board leadership, they are trying to communicate with the board. And it's a false narrative to suggest that, they're writing the 3 members of board leadership because they're the favorites, or they're writing you as representatives of this board. And your capacity to represent this board is as spokespeople for the board. So if we're not privy to that correspondence and we're not able to develop and give you feedback on that correspondence, you're not acting as our spokespeople. And Mara, this isn't directed to you. This is just generally, you're not acting as spokespeople at that point. You're acting as individuals. And that's the difference. We all communicate with legislators. And if not, we should be. And if Jenny or Jim or Molly want to talk to 8 of them at the same time, that's private, that's personal. None of us should be privy to that. But when you are being reached out to in your capacity, not as a member of the board, but as board leadership collectively, that carries an additional responsibility of representation for me and for the other members of this board. And when we talk about discomfort, like I talked to the legislators who had sent those correspondence pieces to us, and I said, was it your expectation that this be shared? And their thinking was maybe not the letter per se, but certainly the contents in it. That wasn't even done. Like that was never communicated. But then I said, well, would you have objected to the correspondence? And almost to the T, they both said, look, if we're writing to a public official, we assume that it's going to be grammared. We assume that it's going to be in the public space. So I don't think there's this expectation of privacy that, well, we really didn't want this shared, because I don't think they would communicate in that public vehicle. And again, I come back to this saying, yeah, I think that rules to address this kind of behavior, it's sloppy, it's not precise, and wow, I wish it wasn't necessary. But if we have elected leaders reaching out to board leadership, my naive expectation was that would be communicated to us, that would just be given to us, but it wasn't. And I think that's wrong. I think it puts some people in a position of knowing the policy battlefield a little bit better. And it just hampers a true open exchange of ideas. And I don't know why in the world we just wouldn't want that to be part of the discussion. And again, I stress this. I'm not saying it's nefarious. Everybody's moving at 1,000,000 miles per hour. Maybe that's why it wasn't put out. But for whatever reason, I just want it to stop. If public officials are communicating with board leadership on policy, all 3 collectively, I look at that and say they're trying to send a message to the board. And instead of writing all of us, they're addressing our leadership. But wow, it'd be nice to know what they're thinking before we take a vote.
I need to clarify. I don't disagree with you. I think it's a matter of respect, courtesy, whatever you want to call it, that if I write a letter to somebody, regardless of who it is, that if that letter shows up in a public board meeting of another body, that they know that their letter is now disseminated more widely. I just think it's a matter of, I'm not saying that that letter shouldn't go out. I am not saying that letter shouldn't be shared. What I am saying is that when a letter ends up in the hands of somebody other than the individual people that it was written to, again, it doesn't say to the USBE board, whatever, and it's given to leadership. When a correspondence is shared with individual people, the person that shared it should be given the common courtesy to know that that letter is going to a much wider audience. So and maybe it's just courtesy. Maybe it's just something internally that board leadership will do while they're sending it out. Maybe it's not that. I am increasingly concerned about the lack of decorum and politeness and I don't know, just general respect that people give each other. So maybe it's just my own problem. I don't have a problem with it, with our procedures on what we do. I just think that there's that piece missing that concerns me.
And the chair, we have that provision in the rule. We have a
We've got you,
provision
Carol,
that
sorry.
says,
It got struck.
no, that's Jenny's rule.
Oh.
We have a,
That's Jenny's draft.
we have a provision that,
Okay.
we have a provision that says we can't disseminate that without asking the sender. But again, that's the clunkiness, that's the sloppiness, that's the,
I mean, they've sent it. It's now able to be used. They just get the courtesy so that when you call them
But-
and ask them about it, they know how you ended up with it.
and that's in my proposal. It's not in Board Vice Chair Earl's.
Okay.
Let's
so
jump
I'm
to-
confused about the-
Well, we had draft 5 up, and then we requested to see draft 6 to kind of see the difference. I mean, let's put draft 5 up and then pull up draft 6 on your computer, but let's jump to Member Lear. I want to remind the committee, it is 12:03. I'm not trying to rush, just let you know. I don't think, I mean, there's work to be done, right? So just keep that in mind, but Member Lear.
A couple of introductory thoughts. First of all, I don't have the same sensitivity to what transpires between leadership and I shouldn't say that exactly. I have a different sensitivity to what transpires between board leadership and legislators than most of you do, because they're not people whose values I share for the most part. But I do admire, and I want to believe, and I believe, Molly, that you're talking about a matter of respect in terms of only communicating things that you let the person know. But I think that would be easy to solve, because even with either draft, you could say, shall share with board leadership and the author of the correspondence, or something along those lines. That could be easily addressed. But what I do worry about more, and I don't know how to get at this, and this is the only piece that I worry about. A couple of board chairs ago, and many sessions ago, there was an intentionally private discussion with legislative leadership and 2 of the board. There was only a chair and 1 vice chair at the time, and a deal was struck. And it was, you get your board members to sign on to this. And I think the board chair at the time came to regret that, and at the time, I think he was flattered, but it was not what you described before of things that go to board leadership are really messages to the board. It was, we were doing this the way the legislature does things. And I was super offended as a board member. I'm still mad about it. So I want to get at that part of it, but I don't necessarily want every piece of correspondence, and I don't know how to do that. So this is really
written down. Was it written correspondence, or was it
verbal agreement.
It was probably, you're right, that was probably more a verbal agreement, which is, I don't know if that's worse or better. But it was wrong, I feel like, for leadership who is elected to represent all board members, to be intentionally divided from the people that they're elected to serve. So that's the part I would like to get at. The other final comment I have is, and I don't know how to do it. I would rather just say to the board leadership, don't ever make deals in secret without telling us. That's all. That's what I'd like to say, and know that that would be so. The other thing is, I know there was this one incident about this one letter, and I don't think that this policy should be driven by that situation, that incident. I think my opinion is board leadership saw it differently than some board members, and I think board leadership has learned a lesson from that, and it wouldn't happen. Besides, we'll have new board leadership before we're even into a different session. So I don't want to. I think belaboring these words too much is a solution looking for a problem. So I just want to say those things. It's the secretive nature of board leadership keeping things from the members that their prime directive. You are elected to represent us, and if board leadership does anything that is not acting on behalf of the board, that's what troubles me.
Thank you, Member Lear. I'd like to wrap this up by 12:15 unless the committee would like to extend until 12:30. My thoughts, though, before we get to Member Wood, is one, do we have any amendments today? I think we've been sharing a lot, and we're all kind of on a similar page of what we'd like to see, but nobody really knows how to verbalize it.
I do have one amendment.
And so, okay, so we have an amendment. And then secondly, we just passed a rule based on what we changed here. So are we going to then vote on this and send it back to the full board? Or do we want to, how does that look? Right? Because we want the green piece to be active, right? So just some thoughts for the committee and maybe staff, if you can help us as Member Wood or others share comments. But I'd like to, again, wrap this so that we can get staff and committee members ready for our next meeting, and at the same time be prepared for our next full board meeting while respecting the work that we've done on these rules as well. So Member Wood, and then I'm going to go to Vice Chair Carey for his motion.
Well, and that's what I'm wondering. I like the concerns I have with draft 5, was it 72 hours? Well, what if the person doesn't respond within 72 hours? You know, especially during the session, sometimes, so we're going back and forth. What if they don't respond in 72 hours? Now, and if the board secretary is forwarding something to distribute, why does it take 3 business days? I guess that's what we changed it to last time. We changed it to 3 business days. Why does it take 3 business days to send out an email? If she's sending it out, she can just BCC us all on there. So there's a lot of just details in this that seem unnecessary, which is why I like to go back to draft 6. If an elected public official sends correspondence addressed to all members of the board policy or board leadership, and I would like to put sends policy related correspondence addressed to all members of board leadership, and the content requires a response under section 5, the board secretary shall send the initial correspondence to the full board with the outgoing communication referenced in section 5. And I believe we could add in there with a notification to the original sender that this has gone to the full board. So, and then the outgoing is that the entire board shall be copied on correspondence sent to elected public officials that communicates an official board position when signed by or sent under the name of all members of board leadership. It's very simplified, but it would account, if you look at what happened with that letter that we're talking about. It came, there was a request, there was a need for a response, and that went back out. If that had been sent out to all of us, none of us would have been surprised later on a few months later.
The letter in question was sent to us on the 11th. The board meeting was on the 11th.
And it was
So
just a couple months later when we finally were notified of it, though.
On the 11th. And we distributed it.
No, this is, well, maybe we're talking about different letters.
so it sounds like, Member Wood, you have a informal motion. You know what I mean? So I don't know if while Vice Chair Carey is giving his motion, if you want to work with staff to develop what that would look like, Vice Chair Carey?
Yeah, just some feedback, because I could get on board with this. My only, you're putting, again, the decision-making process back into the hands of leadership. And again, not in a pejorative way, but if the content requires a response, whose determination is that? The same people that we haven't been getting the correspondence from. So that's my reluctance to jump on board with this. But instead of saying, and the content requires a response, I think it should be if a response is given. Now, that's that has its own gray areas, but I would feel much more comfortable with that, because then they get a letter. If they're responding to it, well, requires a response. What if it doesn't require a response, but you're giving a response anyway? To me, there's too much latitude there. And I just wouldn't want that. I think we're creating an exception so wide that there really is no particular rule to it.
Can I ask a question that's been on my mind for a little while now? Section 5, outgoing correspondence from board leadership. The entire board the entire board shall be copied on correspondence sent to elected public officials that communicates an official board position when signed by or sent under the name of all members of board leadership. I'm wondering if this covers kind of what you're talking to. If I get an email, let's say I'm in board leadership and I get this email and I respond, I guess that doesn't, no, I'm gonna take that back.
I understand. I think I know where you're going, and I would agree with that, except a response doesn't have to be in writing. And that's the rub with this, that they get something, and then if we say, well, if you send something in writing back, you got to provide that. But what if they just pick up the phone? That's
Well, I think this doesn't care. I don't care if it needs a response. I don't care if it needs a response or not. I don't think the response part of it is the important part of it. I think it's more being notified. But I don't know why I can't say, instead of all this stuff about notify the public official, and if the public official says yes, all of us have agreed that message, that communication with board leadership would be subject to ground. It's now a public document. So why don't we just say that the message or the communication is you notify the sender of the communication at the same time you notify the board. Why can't you just say that instead of going around in circles about telling them we're going to send it and then asking if that's okay and then waiting to, is there a problem with that? Molly, you were the one that was big on protocol or is that, do you feel like that's adequately respectful to say that we're not going to ask you? We all know, we're all grown-ups. We know that this is a policy making issue and it's subject to GRAMA. So we're letting you know we're sending it to the full board when we send it to the full board. I have no problem with that. Okay.
I'm going to jump back to Vice Chair Carey if he has an official motion. Again, we've had discussion. Let's get something out that we can debate.
No, I like the version that board member Wood was working off of. I think the language is better. And I think if we merge that with what board member Lear was just talking about, you have a better worded document that gets to the heart of it, which is not so much what our board leadership is sending out as it is the information that's coming in, because I think all board members could benefit from that.
Yeah, Let's get a motion put together on the board if the three of you will work with Angie and make sure that this gets done.
What, are you leaving? Jeez.
You've enabled me. I can't even.
We can't get one on one screen and one on the other? That's not.
So.
Okay.
That's it.
Oh, but. No, don't worry about it. No.
So Molly, does policy related correspondence limit those things coming into board that would give us the information we need without? I want some respect to our legislators here.
That's all I was asking for.
It feels like that there's a lot of work goes on during the session back and forth in terms of what our priorities are. Will you do this? Can you? I mean, I see. I'm up there when they're there, and I'm seeing what's happening.
So, and this is probably a cautionary tale for anybody that thinks they want or are fine with board leadership, is when you sit in leadership, you no longer have, you are not any longer, you have no right to, and you have much less right to an individual position. Everything you do and say has to reflect something that the board has decided or signaled or like, well, that's how it should be. And if you have a personal whatever, it is on you to say this is personal. And even then you should be very measured in what you're talking about. That's why it is more freeing to be a member of the board and not a member of board leadership. So it is difficult. It's hard to stomach that because you're doing so much back and forth. The question now becomes, what kind of report do I need to give board about any sort of interaction? Because now it feels like anything I say needs to be documented and then sent out to everyone, that there is no trust place that, like, that level now becomes very fuzzy as to what has to be reported out.
Molly, how many correspondence do you get addressed to all three of you on policy issues? Are we looking at 200 a year?
Well,
600?
my next question is, are you talking about emails? Are you talking about texts? Or are you talking about letters?
It's correspondence, so it would be all of the above.
So do you want to know,
I don't think you get more than 100 a year addressed to all three of you on policy issues. That would trigger this rule.
if you're talking text
And
to
if you
see
are,
if
then we need to see it. That's way
well,
too many.
no, it's like, are you able to meet with so-and-so and talk about where your board wants to go with fees? And then all of a sudden someone else wants to talk about fees. And then you got 4 legislators wanting to talk about fees. And you're like, hey, can we get everybody together to talk about fees? There's a lot of back and forth there.
To me, that's a scheduling
Right,
thing.
that's
It's not a policy.
Right, but they'll
related.
say something like, so-and-so wants to include co-curricular or someone, I mean,
Yeah,
it's
that's not
fluid.
correspondence I would want as a board member.
Okay,
That's
okay,
me.
that's great.
Speaking for me.
So
How do you define that?
I'm just saying, that's what I'm saying, is that line is very, I mean, we're splitting hairs here. That's the problem. I mean, one person will say that doesn't count, but then I explain more and you're like, oh, that does count. And so we can try, we need to try, obviously, to clarify this. And it's, I mean, I'm willing to try whatever.
Let me try using this. I'm using draft 6, the paragraph we had from Jenny's draft 6. And let's see if this, and I'll read it. I mean, because I think I can say it better as I read through it. If an elected public official sends policy-related correspondence addressed to all members of board leadership. And I would delete, and the content requires a response under section 5. I would delete that. The board secretary shall send the initial correspondence to the full board. Delete all the stuff that she's deleted to the full board. To the full board, so initial correspondence to the board with outgoing communication, with the outgoing and with the notification to the original sender that notification has been sent to the full board. I think that's where I would go with this.
I'm
Striking the language in the content
I
requirement.
kind of like all board members better than full board, but that maybe isn't just not.
Yeah, Ben, that goes. The board secretary shall send the initial correspondence to the full board with the outgoing communication, if any. Because if there's no response, I still want the.
I don't think, that's why I would delete that altogether.
Oh, you would delete that. Issue to the full board.
Strike with the
Yeah.
communication reference.
Yes, because I don't care if it requires a response or not. If it's policy related, I'd like to receive it.
If Carol would accept this as a friendly, can we add? No, can you call that back up, Ben? If an elected public official, then Angie had language right there excluding members of the board, or
yeah.
I forget what you said, but.
Yeah, and also the second notification should be communication. Okay, now, yeah, I agree. I think we don't mean internal board.
If an elected public official.
And you realize this could be, if somebody wanted to be more secretive, that all they need to do is send it to 2 members of board.
100%.
don't.
I'm just noting that that's something someone may raise. I don't care. I do not care. This is not my fight.
If you're a public official, just give it to your staff member who's not a public official and have them give it to the board, right? I mean, there's 1,000 ways.
Yeah, okay. So just so it's the concept that I wish could be communicated to board leadership. So I think that captures most of what we've talked about. What do you guys think?
Yeah, look over that motion, make sure everything's in order, then we will move forward.
That's good by me.
Someone making that motion?
I believe this is Member Lear's motion.
The least at stakes. Okay, so I move that the committee amends, or is that what we want to say is amends draft 6? Or are we sticking with draft 5?
No, 6.
This is the draft 6.
Okay, that the committee amends section 4 of draft 6 to read, if an elected public official other than a member of the board sends policy-related correspondence addressed to all members of board leadership, the board secretary shall send the initial correspondence to the full board with the notification of the original sender that the communication has been sent to the full board.
Are you willing to extend that motion to the green section that
and the green motion is now 6A, right?
6.
And 6, subsection 6, which reads official communication, which reads except as, do you want me to include?
You could probably just say as
Which is right, which reads as provided in committee meeting.
Thank you, Member Lear. So the motion before the committee is that the committee amend section 4 of draft 6 to read, if an elected public official other than a member of the board sends policy related correspondence addressed to all members of board leadership, the board secretary shall send the initial correspondence to the full board with a notification to the original sender that the communication has been sent to the full board. Additionally, the committee adds section 6 to draft 6 as follows, which we invite the public to read and listen to the minutes or call somebody. Call me, fine. You can call me. Okay. Any discussion, any further discussion to this motion? Member Hart has a light on.
No.
Okay.
I just want
And
to say,
Vice Chair Carey.
yeah, I just want to say, look, I want to thank everyone for this. But I don't think it's a perfect solution, but I think it's more about the importance that we place just on this increased awareness that more information is better. So I just want to thank everyone for their cooperation on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. Member Wood.
I just have a question for Vice Chair Hart. Are there any concerns that this will limit the partnership of leadership? That now one of you will be left out so that this doesn't have to apply?
Absolutely. Well, I can't speak for anybody else, but it doesn't matter. What I want is something that people are happy with. It does not, even if it did, if people are happy, then my job would then be to make sure that we didn't, as members of leadership, that we didn't do that didn't happen. And so if there was something that happened and it looked like that I had been left out of something as a member of leadership, it would be my job to correct that within leadership. I am not, all I want is this issue settled. I just want a policy so that any leadership group moving forward knows the expectations and that this kind of stuff doesn't keep coming up under the shadow of some sort of, inappropriateness. So as long as board members are comfortable with this, they are marching orders for leadership.
I think it does in many ways increase transparency across the board.
And, if it needed to be stronger, great. It's simply whatever the board wants. I'm not concerned a bit. You could say in here that each board member has shared access to my email since I'm board leadership. And I'd be like, okay, that is what I agree to if I agree to be a board leadership member. And then you just have a decision whether or not you want to accept that role. I just want board members to have something they're comfortable with. That's all.
Thank you, Member Hart. So again, the motion before the committee is that the committee amend section 4 and that the committee add section 6. Seeing no other lights, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Committee members, that gets us, we have one. Oh, yeah. Let's see if we can get a motion on there. Member Wood?
Okay. I move that the committee approves board policy 2004 draft 6 as amended and forward to the board for approval.
Thank you, Member Wood. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves board policy 2004 draft 6 as amended and forward to the board for approval. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Okay. Just for the committee's information for the committee, we did not get to agenda item 2.15. This is USBE strategic plan and goals. I just mentioned this to Member Hart in her meetings with leadership, and I'm sure they'll reach out and say, what are your goals? And we'll hopefully get it back on another agenda.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
Okay. With that, we are ending this meeting. We're adjourned. Thank you.